The story begins with a man getting angry at someone who suggested cutting open his father's stomach to perform surgery. He refused to let such a barbaric thing happen. A woman then explained that the symptoms the older man showed were signs of ileus. She warned that if it was left untreated, it could cause the intestines to die, lead to a serious infection called peritonitis, and in the worst case, cause death. The man argued that they could not trust anyone without magic. He insisted that they should just improve his father's monoflow to ease the pain instead. The woman grabbed him by the collar and told him to stop making excuses and actually look at the patient. She said this was not something that could be fixed just by removing the pain. If his eyes were so useless, she added, they might as well be taken out and put in a jar for display. The man was left speechless. He glanced at his father, who was groaning in pain, then sank to the floor and asked who would ever agree to perform surgery on his father. He had never even heard of someone cutting open the stomach before. The woman calmly tied her hair back and said she would be the one to do it. She introduced herself as Kiara Bellworth and swore that she would save the sick man in front of her no matter what it took. Some time ago in modern-day Japan, an argument broke out inside an operating room. A woman pointed out that the surgeon in charge was not skilled enough, and that at his current pace the patient could die. Kirihara Akira, another surgeon, told everyone to step aside so she could take over. The male surgeon did not care whether Akira was a talented surgeon or not. He warned her not to overestimate herself and told her to leave since he was already handling the case. Akira could not believe such an unqualified doctor was treating a patient like an object. She told him the patient was bleeding and that he was wasting precious time. She pointed out how inexperienced he was and told him to step aside if he did not want to embarrass himself further. The male surgeon said she would regret it and walked out. Akira took a deep breath, composed herself, and began the operation. After the surgery, Akira was called by her superior, who told her to leave the hospital. She asked for a clear reason. The superior reminded her that she had removed Dr. Yamada from his own operating room and had spoken to him harshly. Akira explained that the patient had been in critical condition, and that Yamada had acted amateurishly throughout the procedure, so she had stepped in. The superior said that was not the main problem. He told her that Dr. Yamada's father, a well-known university director, was furious. He had threatened to hold the medical department's leaders responsible for insulting his son unless Akira was punished. Akira did not care who Yamada's father was, as she believed she had made the right choice to save a patient's life. However, her superior told her that her actions had now put everyone's career at risk. In the end, he said it was best for her to leave. He ordered her to pack her things and go. When Akira left, people started talking behind her back. They said that even the best surgeon could not stand up to power. Many believed she deserved what happened because she often interfered with other doctors' patients. They thought she was acting too proud just because she was good at surgery. Akira shot a sharp look at them before walking away, left completely on her own. In her mind, she believed she had only done what she thought was right. When she got home, she opened a can of beer and grumbled about how those people did not even have the courage to say anything to her face. She could not believe that Dr. Yamada refused to admit his lack of skill, and instead went crying to his father. She also could not believe her own superior gave in so easily. In her view, they were only worried about the next election for the hospital director. For the moment, she decided to push the matter aside and relax with a book later. As she picked up her phone, she came across a shoujo manga titled Cinderella's Engagement. It told the story of Kiara, a noblewoman mistreated by her own family, who faced one trial after another while slowly growing closer to the prince. Akira knew stories like this were very popular lately, but she had rarely read any manga herself. Soon after, she became absorbed in what she was reading and yelled at her phone, saying they should have stopped the bleeding already instead of crying. She could not believe they were just standing there, not even calling for a doctor. She also did not understand why they were not using their healing magic, which seemed so convenient, and instead spent their time chatting. She knew the patient was going to die if they kept wasting time. She complained that too many characters in this manga ended up dying. Even worse, the main character only cried instead of helping. The protagonist, Kiara, was the eldest daughter of a count's family that had produced skilled magicians for generations. However, Kiara was born without any magic. Because of this, her stepmother and half-sister treated her badly. Kiara endured it all, hoping marriage would finally set her free, but her hopes were crushed when her fiancé was taken by her half-sister. Misfortune after misfortune followed her until she met the prince, and a connection slowly began to grow between them. Still, the main characters died without mercy. The dark and emotional plot was said to be the reason for the manga's popularity, but Akira did not like it at all. The protagonist kept crying while the people protecting her died one after another. Akira felt that the protagonist was just like her. She too had cried for her father's death and apologized over and over, but Akira thought that if she were the protagonist, she would save everyone. However, she also knew that if a surgeon like herself ended up in a world without X-rays or CT scans, it would be terrible news. She had no intention of indulging in such impossible fantasies. As she decided to sleep, a sudden wave of dizziness and pain hit her. She groaned and held the back of her head, feeling as if it was splitting apart. She tried to grab her phone to call an ambulance, but before she could, her consciousness slipped away. After some time, Akira finally woke up. She cried out in pain, but then realized the pain had stopped. She wondered if she had just gone through a subarachnoid hemorrhage. She planned to call an ambulance, but froze in confusion. Looking around, she wondered if she had somehow ended up in another country. The room was far too big and richly decorated for what she was used to. She thought she might have gone insane, but the headache was gone, and there were no signs of paralysis or any other problems with her body. She walked around, thinking there should be nothing wrong with her brain. Then she stopped in front of a mirror. She did not want to believe it, but somehow she had turned into Kiara Bellworth from the manga Cinderella engagement. Soon after, Kiara was served tea, and she thanked the maid named Anna. At that moment, Akira realized she was not dreaming. She had truly become Kiara Bellworth. Even more surprising, she still had all of Kiara's memories. She could clearly remember the entire family structure and even the maid's name, something she should not have known as Kirihara Akira. She wondered if her situation was like those reincarnation stories she had read in manga. Maybe her soul had entered Kiara's body, or perhaps Kiara had imagined her as a fictional person in her own mind. However, the events in the hospital felt far too strange to be just a dream. More importantly, Akira still had her medical knowledge from her past life, which proved that she was not imagining things. She told herself that sitting around would not help. She needed to focus on what was happening now. If her memory was correct, there was supposed to be a ball hosted by the Duchess later. This was the event where Kiara would secretly meet the prince and begin to develop feelings for him. But Kiara already had a fiancé, so she gave up on those feelings. Not long after, her father died in an accident, which began a chain of events that ruined her life. Her stepmother took control of the Bellworth family, and her fiancé was stolen by her younger sister. With her position in the family gone, Kiara was eventually treated like a servant. Later on, she and the prince grew close again, but jealousy from others made her a constant target, causing her endless suffering. Akira had only read up to that point in the story and did not know what would happen afterward. In a world full of dramatic twists and mystery, she doubted it would end happily. She had no desire to get caught in any more trouble. If she was going to live as Kiara, she wanted to avoid all the tragedies and live a quiet, peaceful life. That meant she had to make sure she never met the prince, no matter what. Unfortunately, the ball was still going to happen later. Just then, the door opened and a girl stepped inside, calling for her older sister. She asked if Kiara was feeling all right. She was worried because Kiara had not come down for breakfast and wondered if she was still sick. Kiara answered that she was already fine. The girl was her half-sister, Federica. Unlike Kiara, Federica had a natural talent for magic. Federica told her not to push herself too much and suggested skipping the party that evening. She said she would inform Richard, his fiancé, about it and even offered to attend the ball in her place. On the outside, Federica seemed kind, but she often did things like this to cause trouble for Kiara. She even leaned in close and whispered that Richard had called her the belle of the ball. She added that Kiara's fiancé sure knew how to charm people with his words. Instead of feeling upset, Kiara was actually pleased. She was happy that Federica could go in her place, which clearly surprised her younger sister. Kiara then pretended to be in pain and groaned about how she was not feeling well. She kept up the act and insisted she could not make it to the party. Federica seemed caught off guard. Kiara then gently pushed her out of the room, saying she would rest and wishing Federica and Richard a wonderful evening together. With that, Kiara had already solved the first problem of meeting the prince. The next challenge was stopping her father's death. In the original story, this was only mentioned in a few short lines. Kiara's father Bruno died when his carriage suddenly went out of control. This time, she only needed to keep her father from riding a carriage on that specific day. The problem was, she had no idea how to do it. Burning the carriage would be too dangerous, and she would never hurt the horses. With so many servants around, she could not pull off anything suspicious without being caught. As she stared out the window, her eyes fell on the nearby horse barn. That gave her an idea, something she could manage in just a few minutes. Not long after, the Count was stunned to find his carriage filled with hay and horse manure. Frustrated, he complained about being late for an important meeting. An attendant explained that they could prepare another carriage, but only for his return trip. With no other choice, the Count decided to walk. Before leaving, he ordered the carriage to be cleaned by the end of the day. The maids were shocked that someone had dared to tamper with the Count's carriage. They wondered if they should tell the Madame and Federica. They could not find Kiara anywhere and doubted she was hiding in her room as usual. In truth, Kiara had slipped out quietly. She followed her father from a distance, making sure everything went according to her plan. In the end, the Count reached his destination safely. Kiara no longer had to worry about her father's accident. Soon after, a few men nearby began talking about a carriage they had seen on another street. They said it was in terrible shape and thought someone might have died. Hearing this, Kiara hurried past them feeling foolish. She realized she had only focused on her father's carriage and never thought there could be another reason for the accident. She might have stopped her father from getting hurt, but someone else might have been harmed instead. She rushed to the scene and saw a carriage lying on its side. She told people to step aside, saying she was a doctor and would check the injured, but a man there said no one was hurt and told her to look closely. The carriage was already being lifted back onto its wheels. The man explained that it had hit a cart while trying to avoid a child who had run into the road. The crash did flip the carriage, but no one had died or been badly injured. Kiara felt relieved. At that moment, the child's mother began scolding him for running into the street. The boy said he had only been trying to save a cat. His mother kept scolding him, telling him he had caused too much trouble for everyone. Suddenly, a man stepped in and told the mother not to be too hard on her son. He explained that the boy might have been frightened as well. The woman called him Lord Cecil and apologized on her son's behalf. She said she was sorry for making his carriage crash and for the injury on his face. Cecil replied that it was only a small scratch. He said the damage to the carriage was minor, the horses were unharmed, and there was no need for her to worry. Kiara was surprised to see the owner of the carriage staying calm about the whole situation. When she looked more closely, she realized this man was Prince Cecil. She wondered why the prince was here. It suddenly struck her that the person in the accident was the prince himself, and this event had never happened in the original story. One of Cecil's attendants came forward and reported that arrangements had been made to recover the damaged carriage. He suggested they continue the journey using a hired one instead. Cecil thanked him for taking care of the matter, but then noticed the attendant breathing heavily. Concerned, Cecil asked if he was all right. The attendant said he was fine, but admitted that he had hit his chest when he fell. At first, he said it only hurt a little, but soon he began groaning in pain. Cecil told him not to push himself and decided they would have a healer examine him later. The mother then spoke again and apologized. She explained that she had been a widow for a long time and could not pay a large amount of money right away. Cecil reassured her that she did not need to worry about the repair costs. Kiara then understood that the prince had been caught in the accident while traveling in secret. She felt guilty that they had been the cause of the trouble, but she also knew she needed to leave as soon as possible. Just then, Cecil asked his attendant Cliff what was wrong. Cliff, holding his chest, said it was getting harder to breathe. Cecil told him to wait because they were going to the medical center immediately. He did not care how it happened, so he told another attendant to prepare a carriage right away. Kiara kept watching. She had already gone out of her way to avoid the prince. In this world, magic was combined with medicine. Instead of doctors, people relied on healers to take care of everyone's health. Compared to them, Kiara had no magic at all. Earlier, she had tried to step in without thinking, but she doubted anyone would take her seriously. In a place where healing magic could fix almost anything, there was no role for a former doctor like her. Still, her conscience could not let her stay silent. She asked everyone to stop and introduced herself as a doctor. Then, she requested to examine the attendant immediately. The prince, looking puzzled, asked if she was really a doctor. Kiara pushed him aside and began unbuttoning Cliff's clothes. She checked his pulse and looked at his neck. She noticed that his carotid artery was swelling with each beat. His pulse seemed normal, but his breathing was fast and shallow. She leaned close to his chest, listening carefully, and pressed down several times. The others watched with worry, unsure of what she was doing. Kiara saw that his chest was rising unevenly. The sound of breathing was weaker on the right side, and when she tapped his chest, it gave a dull sound. She realized she had been wrong at first. Cliff had a pneumothorax. The prince looked even more confused, not understanding the term. Kiara explained in simple words that Cliff had a hole in his lung, and air was leaking into the space around it. The air was pressing against his lungs, making it harder for him to breathe. She remembered hearing that Cliff had fallen on his chest when the carriage overturned. She guessed that a broken rib had pierced his lung. He could still breathe on his own for now, but if the air kept building up inside his chest, the pressure would crush his lungs and heart. If that happened, he would surely die. The others still looked lost, not knowing what she meant. Kiara understood that people in this world would not recognize such medical problems. Her words made the prince think deeply. He recalled once seeing a soldier who had been shot in the chest. The soldier's breathing became worse and worse until he finally died. Kiara explained that this case was similar. She was relieved that the prince understood so quickly. Realizing how serious the situation was, Cecil said he was willing to pay any amount to save his trusted attendant. Another attendant suggested sealing the hole in the lung with healing magic. Kiara then admitted she could not use healing magic because she had no magic power. Everyone around her was surprised, as they had never heard of a healer without magic. Even the bystanders found it hard to believe that people without magic still existed. The prince then asked if she was not actually a healer. Kiara clarified that she was not one, but she did have proper medical knowledge. One attendant dismissed her, saying they could not trust her, and advised the prince to take Cliff immediately to the medical center. Kiara reminded them how long it would take to travel there. The attendant told her to keep quiet, calling her a fake doctor. The insult angered Kiara. She could not believe she was being called a quack. She warned him that if he insulted her again, she would sew his rude mouth shut. She also pointed out that taking Cliff to the medical center made no sense when his condition was getting worse by the minute. She doubted he could survive the journey. She urged them to stop being naive. Besides, she explained, healing magic would not work for Cliff because too much air had already built up inside his chest. She needed to release the air first. Just then, Cliff groaned in pain and Kiara noticed his breathing becoming even weaker. After thinking for a moment, Cecil asked if Kiara could really remove the trapped air from Cliff's chest. Kiara said she could, but she needed the right tools. Cecil then remembered something from the past. A soldier had once taken a bullet while protecting him. Cecil had asked a healer to treat the man. The healer said he had already closed the wound and claimed that if the soldier's breathing did not improve, it was his own fault. The prince could not believe the healer was blaming the patient. The healer insisted that the visible injuries were already healed and asked what else could be done beyond that. This memory made Cecil decide to trust Kiara. He asked if she could truly save Cliff. Kiara replied that she would do whatever she could. Cecil promised to find the tools she needed. One of the attendants tried to stop him, but Cecil explained that he had once seen a soldier with the same type of injury. Even though healing magic had closed the wound, the man still died. What Kiara was saying made sense to him, so if she had the knowledge, he would believe in her. Kiara looked moved. She said there was not much time left and explained that she would start with a chest puncture. She described how she would insert a needle into Cliff's chest to release the air trapped inside. However, she did not have a syringe, so she needed something that could work as a replacement. Just then, she noticed a nearby shop and told the prince to get a long, narrow-tipped pipe. She also told the remaining attendant to bring her strong liquor and a long, thin knife. Cecil instructed Royce, the other attendant, to follow her orders. Others nearby also wanted to help. Soon, everyone began moving. Afterward, they only hoped it would work. Kiara took a steel pipe and broke it in half. She grabbed a liquor bottle and poured some of it over the knives. She also poured some into her hands. She told the men to hold down the patient's arms so she could start the puncture. The procedure itself was not supposed to be complicated, but doing it without proper tools, clean conditions, or medical equipment was something Kiara had never done before. Still, there was no time to stop. She aimed to make a cut above the third rib, but as soon as the knife touched the skin, Cliff groaned in pain. Kiara then inserted the pipe into the opening. The others watched as air began escaping through the pipe with a faint sound. Cliff's breathing slowly returned to normal. Everyone was shocked that it had worked. Kiara reminded them this was only first aid and that Cliff was still in danger. She told them to make sure the pipe did not move out of place, then help load him into the carriage. They chose to leave right away. Cecil tried to ask Kiara to come with them, but she had already disappeared from sight. The prince was left puzzled. Kiara managed to escape from the scene. She had given the patient first aid, but with his broken ribs there was a strong chance of internal bleeding in his chest, which could have led to hemothorax. On top of that, what she had done might have caused an infection. She thought of herself as terrible for leaving the patient like that. Still, she believed it was the right choice, especially since she was trying to avoid the prince. If she had stayed any longer, the prince would have recognized her, and that could have ended in disaster. At least she had managed to avoid her father's possible death. Afterwards, she began to feel hungry and decided to head to the kitchen. On her way, she came across Richard flirting with her younger sister. When Richard noticed her, he greeted her, saying it had been a while and asked if she was feeling better. Kiara apologized for not going with him the other day and asked why he was with Federica. Richard explained that Federica's hair ornament had fallen into his carriage when they returned from the ball, so he had stopped by to return it to her. However, Kiara knew Federica had left it there on purpose so Richard would have a reason to visit. What made it worse was that Richard did not even greet his own fiancée before going to see her sister. This only proved to Kiara that he had feelings for Federica. She pointed out that Richard did not have to come all the way himself. Richard took her words as if she was telling him to send it through a servant. He said that sounded like something she would do. Then he complained that women nowadays were trying to make their own way in society. He even brought up how Federica's grades at the academy were so high that all the male students felt embarrassed. And yet, in his eyes, Kiara spent her days doing nothing but staying inside her room. He told her to learn from her sister and work harder to be independent. Kiara tried to say something, but Richard excused himself before she could. Her stepmother then appeared, praising Richard for having such forward-thinking ideas. She said their family's future would be secure if he married into it. Federica called Kiara lucky to be engaged to such a wonderful man and teasingly told her to at least try to be more likable. Kiara excused herself, her voice trembling. Kiara was relieved that part of the situation was unfolding just like it did in the manga. In the story, Richard had believed Federica's lies about Kiara mistreating the family and servants, and he had been the one to call off their engagement. Now that Kiara had managed to stop her father from dying, neither Federica nor her mother could do whatever they wanted anymore. Kiara had no plans to marry Richard, but she knew that if she was thrown out of the house, she might end up dying on the streets. For now, she needed to act as if she knew nothing and find a way to end the engagement without causing trouble. She still did not understand why she had ended up in this world, but she was certain she would not simply accept everything without a fight. 2 weeks passed, and Kiara still had no clear plan. One day she found herself attending a public event. At a grand ball, Count and Countess Felsen greeted her warmly. Kiara thanked them for the invitation. They told her not to be so formal since they were practically family. They were Richard's parents, and the party was being held at the Felsen estate, his home. Kiara knew that if she tried to end the engagement during this event, they would do everything they could to stop her. The couple soon noticed that their son was nowhere to be found and were surprised that he had left his fiancée alone. Kiara calmly explained that Richard had gone to meet his friends. She could not tell them that he had actually left her to be with Federica. Since Richard had not spoken to them yet, Kiara offered to look for him so they could greet everyone together later. Richard's parents quietly wondered if Kiara had always been this confident. Kiara walked away on her own. She disliked these gatherings, not because she lacked friends, but because she found them tiring. She decided she would take a walk around the venue, pretend to have a headache, and then head home early. Just then, she overheard some guests talking about the prince who had recently returned from studying abroad. One girl said she had never heard anything about him making official appearances. Another girl shared a rumor that the prince had been quietly visiting different places to learn about the country's current situation. They mentioned hearing that he had attended another ball and expected him to be at this one as well. Kiara felt a wave of annoyance at their giggling. She knew that as long as she moved in high society, there was always a chance she might cross paths with the prince. Before she could think of a way to leave, Richard suddenly called out to her in a loud voice. He appeared with Federica beside him and declared that he had decided to end their engagement. Kiara, along with the rest of the guests, was left shocked. Richard announced that he had heard everything from Federica, who told him that Kiara had been mistreating her and her mother. When Kiara asked what he meant, Richard told her not to pretend to be innocent. He said that the servants of the Bellworth household had confirmed she had treated her sister like a servant and even insulted her with cruel words. He said he could not tolerate it any longer. Federica then began to cry, saying that she had been called a useless freeloader by her own sister, and that Kiara had insulted their mother for not being able to give birth to a male heir. Kiara tried to explain that she had never said such things, but Federica cried even harder. She claimed she did not care about insults toward herself, but she could not bear hearing such things about her mother. The crowd quickly turned against Kiara, calling her terrible for saying those things. Kiara could not believe people were falling for such an old-fashioned act. Richard then declared that he could not marry her, even if their parents had arranged it. He repeated that he was ending the engagement and asked everyone present to witness his decision. Kiara could not believe they had gone so far just to frame her. On top of that, the scene was unfolding at a grand ball hosted by the Felsens, where most of the guests supported Richard. Now that she had lost her place in society, her chance of inheriting the family estate looked grim. Even her own father had turned his back on her. She knew a man so obsessed with appearances would never defend her. She lightly slapped her own cheek, reminding herself that she had already expected this. She was used to standing alone without anyone on her side. Her pride would never allow her to give in to such a pitiful act that felt like a childish school performance. If they wanted a fight, she was more than ready to give them one. Kiara told Richard that she understood his position. She tried to continue speaking, but someone interrupted, saying the conversation was one-sided and unfair. The voice was familiar. When she turned, she saw Prince Cecil. She could hardly believe her eyes. The prince asked Richard why he would publicly humiliate a young woman and act as if he were the victim. He said it was clear they were only trying to destroy Kiara's reputation. Federica quickly argued that she was only revealing her sister's cruelty. Cecil responded that accusing someone without any proof was not revealing the truth at all. It was simply slander. Richard angrily demanded to know who Cecil was, claiming he had no memory of inviting such a rude guest. Cecil calmly said it was understandable since he had not been invited. A friend had secretly brought him in. He then introduced himself as Cecil von Lowenberg. He explained that many might not recognize him because he had been away from the country for some time, but he was the first prince of the kingdom. Gasps filled the room. Richard asked why the prince was even at the ball. Cecil said he had been searching for a woman he was eager to meet. He knew she was a noble lady but did not know her name, so he had been sneaking into every ball he could hoping to find her. And now, at last, he had. With a teasing smile, he looked toward Kiara, who appeared tense and uneasy. He stepped closer and said he had been longing to see her, his dear doctor, and asked if she was Kiara. She tried to act as though she did not know what he was talking about, but Cecil refused to believe her. He reminded her of the trouble he had gone through just to find her. At that moment, Richard stepped in and said the matter was only between the Felsons and the Bellworths. He told Cecil to stay out of it. Cecil could not believe that Richard, after making such a public scene, was now telling someone else to keep quiet. Still, he realized Richard had a point. Even though Cecil was part of the royal family, he was still an outsider and had no real reason to interfere with their family affairs. However, Cecil knew that if he became directly involved, no one could complain. Kiara felt confused when the prince walked toward her. He knelt in front of her and gently took her hand. Kiara froze, unsure how to react as Cecil spoke. He explained that he had spent the last few weeks searching for her and had never forgotten her since the day they first met. Looking straight into her eyes, he asked for her hand in marriage. The crowd was stunned. Richard grew angry and told the prince to stop making such outrageous claims, especially about marrying Kiara. The prince gave him a sharp glare and said he was serious. Turning back to Kiara, he asked for her answer. She struggled to find the right words, but then she noticed the prince quietly mouthing for her to say yes. Without fully realizing it, she said yes. A smile spread across the prince's face as he declared Kiara his fiancée. He then challenged anyone to call him an outsider again. Later, in a separate room, the prince laughed quietly as he remembered the expressions he had seen in the ballroom. He said he had not felt that excited in a long time. Kiara simply nodded while lowering her head. Still, the prince believed Kiara's situation was far worse. She had been betrayed not only by her fiancé but also by her own family. He told her not to worry because he would make sure she could live comfortably. Kiara thanked him for his promise. After the chaos from the broken engagement, Richard was dragged away and Federica and the others hurried back to their estate. Meanwhile, the prince had asked for a private room so he could speak with Kiara, and since then he had been staying at the Felson residence. Kiara could not help but wonder what his real intentions were. At last, Cecil introduced himself formally as the first prince of the kingdom, along with his familiar aide Royce. He mentioned they had already met before. Kiara then introduced herself as the eldest daughter of the Bellworth family and thanked the prince for his earlier help. She also apologized for her rudeness the other day. Cecil told her there was no need to apologize. In fact, he wanted to thank her for saving Cliff's life. Because of her, he had not lost an important subordinate. Kiara replied that she had not done much. She was more interested in hearing how Cliff was doing. Cecil explained that Cliff was resting as a precaution and would soon return to work. Kiara felt relieved. She had only given emergency first aid and a pneumothorax was difficult to treat even with modern medicine. It amazed her that magic could heal it so quickly. Still, her thoughts kept returning to one thing: how the prince had discovered her identity and why he had suddenly proposed. Suddenly, someone barged into the room calling out to the prince. Cecil asked what was wrong. The man then claimed a general named Gerald had been attacked. Cecil immediately ran to the general's estate. An injured man tried to stand and greet the prince, apologizing for the unpleasant scene. Cecil told him not to move and asked what had happened. An attendant explained that a young woman had collapsed near the residence. When Gerald went to help her, she suddenly stabbed him in the abdomen with a dagger. Cecil asked where the woman had gone. The attendant said they had lost sight of her and that her movements had seemed unnatural. Kiara then remembered that this man was General Aubert Gerald, the prince's sword teacher, and an important figure who supported him in politics. In the manga, however, he was killed early in the story, which triggered a major political conspiracy. Cecil asked where the healer was. The attendants replied that the healer was away for the night, but the household staff were searching for one. Kiara could not believe they would leave the general in that condition until help arrived. She decided to act first and check the wound herself. Just then, someone told her not to touch his father. He said they were in the Gerald household and questioned why a woman was wandering around there. An attendant told the young master that Kiara was the prince's guest and reminded him to be polite. That only made the young master more upset. Cecil explained that the young master was Eric, the third son of the general, and that he was training to be a healer. Eric claimed that if the blade was removed from the wound, the pressure it was creating would be gone and the bleeding would become much worse. He turned to Kiara and said amateurs should stand back and stay quiet until a healer arrived. This angered Kiara. She called Eric the real beginner who was acting too proud. She then walked past him, picked up a nearby pair of scissors, and apologized to the general in advance. Without hesitation, she cut the general's clothes. Eric demanded to know what she was doing. Kiara replied sharply that she could not check the wounds properly if the clothes were in the way. She told an attendant to cover the blade with a clean cloth and hold it steady so it would not move. The attendant obeyed without question. Kiara examined the stab wound carefully. The dagger was stuck in the general's left side. There were no signs of irritation inside the abdomen, and the depth of the wound was about 5 to 6 centimeters. The general was still awake and alert, showing no signs of shock. It also did not seem like there was heavy bleeding inside the abdominal cavity, though she could not fully rule out organ damage. The general then asked who Kiara was. She introduced herself and asked him for a favor. She requested permission to remove his lower garments so she could check his condition fully. This surprised everyone, including Eric. He called her shameless and finally lost his patience. He tried to push her away, but Kiara shouted back, telling him to stop pretending to know more than he did. She explained that the general's urinary tract or intestines might be injured, and he could be bleeding inside or passing blood in his urine. She said that as a healer's apprentice, Eric should have at least understood that much. She refused to just stand by and watch. She declared that she would treat the general herself. Kiara's words had left Eric puzzled, and he questioned her about what she meant. She explained that if they simply waited for a healer, it would already be too late. Eric tried to ask her more, but before he could, someone entered the room asking about the commotion. It was a doctor named Dohan who walked in with confidence. Eric quickly told him that his father was in critical condition and moved Kiara aside. He introduced Dohan to his father as a respected authority who taught at the academy. Dohan stepped forward, examined the patient, and tapped the dagger lodged in the wound. The touch made the general groan in pain. Kiara demanded to know what he was doing, but Dohan's assistant stopped her, saying the doctor was about to begin treatment. Dohan muttered a spell, and small glowing orbs appeared around the dagger. He focused his magic into the blade, then pulled it out from the general. The moment the dagger was removed, the wound closed instantly. Eric was relieved to see it fully healed. Kiara leaned in to examine it and confirmed the wound was indeed sealed. She asked the general if he felt any pain or discomfort, and he replied that the sharp pain was gone, as if it had never been there at all. When she touched the spot, the skin felt soft and uninjured, and the general showed no reaction to pressure. Even so, Kiara found it hard to believe that such a serious injury could heal so quickly. Dohan expressed his relief that they had made it in time and wiped his hands with a cloth. However, he warned that there was still a chance the dagger had been poisoned, so the general should rest for a while. He said the general could start eating once there were no further issues, and asked Eric, as an apprentice healer, to monitor his father's condition. The general thanked Dohan for saving his life once again. Dohan replied that it was an honor to help the man who protected the kingdom, then excused himself to treat another patient. 3 days had passed since then, and Kiara was still staying at the Gerald residence. She had no other place to go, so the prince insisted they allow her to remain there despite the uneasy stares from Eric and the maids. Even so, she continued to find healing magic fascinating. The general had already recovered enough to eat solid food again. This made her wonder why the general had died in the manga she remembered. She began to question if her actions were slowly changing how the story unfolded. At that moment, Cecil arrived and mentioned that Kiara looked troubled. She was caught off guard and asked why he had come. Cecil explained that he could not ignore his fiancée. He had even spoken with Kiara's father and brought some of her belongings with him. Kiara was taken aback by how quickly he managed to get things done. She then asked nervously why he was going to such lengths for her and wondered if he truly intended to marry her. Cecil told her not to worry, saying he had no such plans, and explained that the proposal at the ball had only been an excuse to put her former fiancé in his place. Kiara replied that there was no advantage in getting involved with her. The prince disagreed, pointing out that she was like the perfect example of a young noblewoman who had saved his subordinate's life with a medical method he had never seen before. It was impossible not to be curious about her. That was why he had slipped from one high society gathering to another, searching for her. He asked who she really was to possess such unusual knowledge. Kiara claimed she had read about medicine in a book during her childhood. Cecil said he had expected that answer, so he had ordered an investigation of every medical text in the royal capital. They had found records of patients with symptoms similar to pneumothorax, but none contained details about punctures or similar treatments. Moreover, books on human anatomy were not available to the public in the kingdom, and yet, Kiara showed she knew such things. When she performed the procedure, she had first located the ribs, then inserted the instrument at a precise point. Those, Cecil said, were the actions of someone who clearly understood the structure of the human body. Kiara wondered who this prince was to figure out so much just by watching her. That was not something an ordinary onlooker could figure out. Cecil also wanted to know how Kiara even knew about him. He remembered the time when she was gathering tools for the puncture. She had glanced at him and called him Prince. Kiara thought back and wondered if she had really said that while she was busy focusing on the patient. Cecil believed that should have been their very first meeting, yet she already knew who he was. He asked her about it again and kept wondering what kind of person his fiancé truly was. Before Kiara could answer, a shout came from outside the room. They stepped out and saw the general and a maid standing in the hallway. The maid said her master was in pain. Kiara felt an uneasy feeling grow inside her for reasons she could not explain. Cecil quickly ran to the collapsing general and checked if he was all right. The general said that Dohan had healed him earlier, but a sharp pain had suddenly struck again. Cecil ordered someone to find Dohan right away. When Dohan arrived, he confirmed that the wounds were already closed. Eric pointed out that his father seemed to be in much more pain than before. Dohan whispered to his assistant, then explained that something was blocking the general's mana flow. He described it as a condition where mana from an outside source, such as healing magic, caused the body's entire mana circulation to stop. This led to a fast decline in the patient's health. The assistants added that this problem usually happened to people born with low mana, just like the general. They said that if the patient had stronger mana, he would have already healed. Eric repeated that his father was still in pain and guessed that the inner wounds had reopened. The assistants were shocked that an apprentice dared to question the doctor. They insisted it was already a miracle that the general had survived such a wound. Dohan told them to be quiet. He said he had already used several healing spells on the general, and with treatment that complete, it was hard to believe the wound could reopen from the inside. The general then coughed hard, scattering saliva. Disgusted, Dohan pulled back his hand and called him unpleasant. The prince, who had stayed silent until now, finally spoke up and confronted Dohan. The doctor asked who he was. Cecil introduced the prince by his full name, which surprised the doctor. The prince reminded him how important the general was to the country and asked him to do everything possible to help him recover. Dohan looked disappointed for a moment, but soon calmed himself. He told the prince that the general did have mana circulatory disorder, and using more healing spells would only make it worse. He said there was nothing more he could do, and bringing another healer would not change the outcome. The only thing left was to cast a spell to ease the pain and keep watching his condition. In the end, he said it was up to the patient whether he would recover. Kiara could not believe what she had just heard. A doctor had spoken recklessly without even taking the time to properly examine the patient. She wondered if this was really how healers worked, blaming the patient whenever the treatment failed. Dohan also could not believe he was meeting her again. His assistants had told him not to get involved with an amateur. And besides, it was almost time for the bishop's examination. Dohan simply told Eric to cast a spell on his father to ease the pain, and he said he would check on them later. When the healers left, the room fell into a heavy silence. Cecil finally spoke and decided to move the general to the military hospital, believing the military surgeons might be able to do something. Royce suggested going to the royal palace instead, but Cecil pointed out that all the royal physicians were currently serving the queen. Eric asked them to wait. His face already showed resignation after hearing what Dohan had said. He decided to cast a pain relief spell on his father and then asked everyone to leave the room. As he worked the spell, Eric quietly asked his father about the pain. The general said it had eased a little, but he still coughed heavily. This made Eric remember the days when the general was at the academy with him. Back then, students whispered about the general's third son wanting to become a healer. They mocked the idea of a so-called weakling standing among the proud military men of the Gerald family. The general had told his son not to pay attention to such talk, as listening to fools was a waste of time. Eric had said it was fine because he had chosen this path himself. He promised his father he would become a great healer so he could support the family. The general had high expectations for him and believed he could achieve it. But now, standing by his father's side, Eric felt powerless. Despite his skills, he could do nothing to stop the slow decline of the man who had raised him. At that moment, Kiara knocked on the door and asked to come in. Eric chose to ignore her. She then knocked harder, forcing him to open the door. He started to say he did not care if she knew the prince and that he would throw her out, but Kiara walked past him and went straight to the general. She apologized for examining him again. Eric tried to stop her but froze when he saw how serious she looked. Kiara asked the general if the pain was only in the area where he had been stabbed, and he said yes. She pressed the wound slightly, making the general groan in pain. She then asked if he had passed gas recently. The question confused him, so Kiara used a simpler word: fart. Eric became angry at her for asking something so rude. The general admitted he had not. Thinking about it, he realized this might explain his stomach pain and bloating. Kiara said that made sense because his abdomen could be swollen. She explained it was not a problem with mana circulation but most likely a bowel obstruction. When Eric asked what that meant, she explained in simple terms that the intestines were blocked, so nothing could pass through. This caused swelling, pain, and sometimes vomiting. Eric asked why his father would have such a problem. Kiara explained that bowel obstructions were common after abdominal surgery. During healing, the intestines could stick to the abdominal wall or to other tissues, narrowing the passage. This reminded Eric of Dohan's rushed treatment, and he asked if that was the reason his father now had the bowel obstruction. Kiara said it had only been a guess, but she still thought the idea of a mana circulatory disorder was complete nonsense. She admired the part about healing wounds with magic, but blaming the patient for later problems and then running away made her see Dohan as incompetent, dangerous, and almost evil. Eric found it hard to believe since he had never learned about such an illness back at the academy. Still, Kiara pushed for treating the general right away. If it had only been a simple injury, it would have been easy to fix. but she quickly noticed the symptoms were getting worse. She explained that twisted intestines could block blood flow, which would lead to constant and severe stomach pain. She warned that there was a high chance it could happen, and suggested they should consider open abdominal surgery. Eric could not believe what she was saying. He thought the idea was crazy and said he would never allow something so brutal. Kiara, however, was convinced that the general had a bowel obstruction. She explained that if it was left untreated, it could lead to dead tissue in the intestines, cause a serious infection in the stomach area, and in the worst case, cause death. Eric became angry and questioned what someone without magic could possibly know. He instead suggested improving his father's mana flow to ease the pain. Kiara told him to look closely at the patient, insisting that such a condition could not be fixed just by easing pain. She made it clear that ignoring the real problem would be dangerous. Defeated in the argument, Eric wondered who could even perform such a strange and risky surgery, since he had never heard of cutting open a stomach before. Kiara tied up her hair, determined to save the general no matter what. At that moment, Cecil walked into the room carrying a suitcase and a bag. He said he had brought most of the tools Kiara had asked for. Kiara was surprised at how quickly he returned and thought it must have been hard to find everything. Cecil explained that he had a few connections. He could not get all the items exactly as requested, but he managed to gather similar tools and blades that he could find. Kiara thanked him, then turned to the general. She reminded him about what she had explained earlier about his condition. She said his health would not improve unless they opened his abdomen and untwisted his intestines. She looked at him seriously and asked him to trust her with his body. The general did not hesitate to believe in her and the prince, placing his life in her hands. Meanwhile, someone received a report that the general had a mana circulatory disorder. Dohan confirmed the report and believed the general would die within a few days. Thinking this was urgent news, he decided to come in person. The woman holding a fan asked if Dohan was sure this was the right time for formal greetings when someone was near death. She worried that his reputation would suffer if the general died. Dohan said the healing process had been perfect, so there was no reason to blame him. He added that such problems only happened when weak people tried to get treatment meant for those above their rank. More importantly, he wanted to share that the first Prince Cecil had been staying at the general's residence. He noticed how desperate the prince seemed. If the general died, Cecil would lose one of his strongest supporters for the throne. Dohan claimed the general's death would affect the struggle for the throne. The woman agreed that this was indeed interesting news. When she heard that the stubborn old general had survived the assassination attempt, she cursed the healer who treated him. Still, she could see that Dohan had potential. Dohan said he was honored. He then shared that his family had served as court physicians for generations, and that he would be grateful if he could receive her support. He addressed her as the Queen, Her Majesty. Back at the Gerald's estate, an attendant told Kiara that the room had been cleaned. Kiara thanked the attendant and asked about the tools. The attendant explained that they had boiled the tools in pots, then asked how much distilled water should be prepared. Kiara told them to make as much as possible and to collect plenty of clean unused cloth. She also decided it was time to get ready. Just then, Cecil arrived and handed her a bottle of ether. Kiara had not expected ether to exist in this world. Although it carried serious risks, it meant she could give the patient a general anesthetic. She thanked Cecil and asked where he had found it, but he only replied that he would rather not say it out loud. Kiara understood and did not press further. She then asked him to find someone who was familiar with blood and organs to help her. Before Cecil could leave, Eric stepped forward and asked them to wait. Kiara said she had no time to argue, but Eric told her he was not there to stop her. He explained that he intended to follow his father's wishes, though that did not mean he already trusted her. He then offered to help with the surgery. Soon after, Kiara, Cecil, and Eric entered the general's room. The general was asleep, breathing steadily after receiving the anesthetic. Kiara had never thought she would use ether for this purpose, since it was rarely used in modern medicine. Eric then mentioned that in the eastern medical city of Ascendia, ether was given to patients to put them to sleep before removing teeth. He wondered if Kiara had any connection to Ascendia. Once all the preparations were done, Kiara told the two men to change their clothes. Eric wore a modern Earth-style surgeon's outfit and asked if it was really necessary since it felt tight and uncomfortable. Kiara explained it was to prevent infection. She also warned him to follow her instructions during the surgery, and if he got in the way or contaminated the surgical area, she would make him leave the room. Eric agreed without arguing. Kiara had tools she would never see in the modern world, yet sterilization was not complete, and she could not find any rubber gloves. At this point, it was almost the same as operating with bare hands. Even so, she was the only one present who could perform this kind of surgery. After steadying her breathing, Kiara began the operation. She used a scalpel to cut the skin. Eric noticed there was no hesitation in her movements. He watched as she widened the incision by cutting the abdominal aponeurosis, allowing her to open the abdomen without slicing through the muscle itself. Since there was no bleeding, Eric realized Kiara truly knew what she was doing. She announced that she had reached the peritoneum and would open it to reach the abdominal cavity. Eric was surprised at how quickly she worked. Kiara asked him to lift the peritoneum while she cut it, making sure the organs underneath were safe. She showed him how to hold the thin membrane, but the sight of his father's insides nearly made him feel sick. Kiara told him to step outside if he could not handle it. Eric replied that he was just startled and could still continue. This was the first time he had ever seen the inside of a human body. Although he had studied anatomy in lectures, this was nothing like the drawings in books. As Kiara expected, a section of the small intestines was swollen, and there were thick adhesions around the stab wound. Eric asked what he should do. Kiara explained that she would first separate the adhesions to release the intestinal blockage, then check the tract for damage. If any part was torn or dying, she would remove that section. Eric understood that meant cutting out part of the intestines. Kiara hoped it would not come to that. She told him to lift the abdominal wall so he could see her work and asked the prince to adjust the lighting. From her view, the adhesions were not too widespread and the digestive tract did not seem to be torn. She felt confident she could handle it. Eric and Cecil quietly watched her work while the general remained peacefully asleep. Afterward, Kiara confirmed that the adhesions had been separated and the blood flow to the intestine was good. She decided they could avoid removing any part of it. Eric asked if the surgery was over, and Kiara said it was. Once they cleaned the area, they would close the cut. However, she warned him not to relax yet, since there was still a high risk of problems after surgery, such as infection. She and Eric planned to take turns watching the general's recovery for a while. Eric agreed, and the two of them continued closing the incision. At one point, Eric completely forgot that the patient on the table was his own father. Instead, he found himself wondering who Kiara really was. Several weeks after the general's surgery in the palace, the king had just approved the rebuilding of Gloucester Church for a group of men. Soon after, the queen entered and noticed how tired he looked. She suggested that he rest for a while. The king said resting was not an option because many problems had piled up, and he had fallen behind on his duties. He also mentioned hearing that the general's condition had been critical. On top of that, he heard that his son Cecil had been chasing after some young woman. The king wondered where he had gone wrong in raising him. The queen told him not to blame the prince, explaining that Cecil avoided the palace because of her. She said that after the late queen died and she quickly took her place, Cecil had hated her. In his eyes, she had stolen his mother's role. The king told her not to blame herself, saying she had done well as both a mother and a queen. He hoped Cecil would one day understand that. The queen thanked him for his kindness, then changed the topic. She said there was something she wanted to discuss and explained that she had recently found a very skilled healer who was waiting outside to be introduced. Outside the door, Dohan was already celebrating in his mind. He believed he was about to become a royal court physician. He imagined the wealth and honor he would soon enjoy, and he felt relieved that he would no longer have to treat patients who were barely clinging to life. Just then, someone familiar walked past Dohan. It was General Aubergerald. Dohan felt confused when the general entered the room and greeted the king. The king looked happy to see him alive and well. The queen was surprised because she believed the general had been on his deathbed. Aubert explained that although healing magic had closed his wound, his condition had only worsened afterward. He said the healer abandoned him, claiming he had a mana circulation disorder. Aubert added that it was thanks to the physician recommended by the prince that he managed to survive. The king was shocked because mana circulation disorder had no known cure. Aubert went on to reveal that he actually had an illness called ileus, an intestinal blockage, which the doctor quickly diagnosed and treated properly. Dohan was even more surprised as the general had never recovered despite all the magic he had used on him. Aubert said he would soon return to his duties and had only come today to report that he was now in good health. The king called him dutiful and was glad to see him safe. Aubert then left, but not before quietly greeting Dohan outside the room. The king asked the queen where the healer was. The queen replied that the healer had another appointment and that they could make introductions on another day. In her thoughts, the queen cursed Cecil for hiding and twisting the truth about the general's condition. After seeing how the prince acted, the queen decided not to hold back anymore. No matter what Cecil did, she believed the throne belonged to her son, the second prince. Meanwhile, Kiara had been reading books about human anatomy. She could not believe that these materials were actually being taught in the academy. The lessons were too simple and filled with mistakes. The fact that ether was used as an anesthetic showed that this world's civilization was similar to the 19th century. Even so, their understanding of anatomy was shockingly poor. Cecil eventually found her and asked if she could spare a moment. They walked to the garden together. The prince thanked her sincerely for everything she had done for him, saying he no longer knew how to repay her. Kiara said she only did what was necessary, and that the general's own strength played a big part in his recovery. Normally, surgery like that carried the risk of infection, but the general's healing went so well that it could be called a stroke of luck. Cecil believed the general would have died if not for Kiara, since the false diagnosis of a mana circulation disorder would have gone unchallenged. Kiara called the term ridiculous and said it sounded like something invented by incompetent people to protect themselves. She asked with anger if such foolish behavior was really to be allowed. Cecil asked Kiara if she knew that their kingdom had grown into a powerful nation because of the progress in magic. Over time, only people with strong magic power were given special privileges. He explained that if those who gained benefits just for having magic stayed at the center of the country, certain outcomes were bound to happen. Kiara understood what he meant. Cecil confirmed that to protect their authority, the rulers had erased any knowledge or technology that did not require magic. Because of this, any treatment other than healing magic was seen as strange, and patients who could not be cured with magic were labeled as having a magic circulation disorder. This made Kiara realize why the anatomy textbook was so disorganized. At that moment, Cecil had just witnessed Kiara save 2 lives without using any magic. Kiara said it was only a coincidence, but Cecil told her not to pretend otherwise. He already knew she had knowledge far beyond their time. He warned that the country would collapse if it kept rejecting new ideas, and before that could happen, he wanted to destroy its corrupt system. He asked Kiara to lend him her strength. Kiara did not know what to say. She did not even understand why she had become Kiara in the first place. Yet now she found herself involved in something far bigger than she had ever imagined. She only wanted one thing. She clenched her teeth and admitted that she had medical knowledge, but she explained that this knowledge could not be applied without technology that was far more advanced than what was available in this era. If a patient collapsed in front of her without the right tools and facilities, she would be nothing more than a helpless bystander, and she could not accept that. She said there was nothing she hated more than being powerless when a patient's life was at stake. Because of this, she asked the prince to promise that he would create an environment where her skills could truly be used. If he did that, she would help him without hesitation, even if it meant tearing the nation apart. Cecil was surprised for a moment, but then smiled. He said they had an agreement and told Kiara that he was counting on her, his doctor. Afterward, Royce was shocked when he found out they were about to witness a human dissection. He could not believe this was the reason the prince had gone out with Kiara. He thought it was insane. Kiara told him to be quiet and asked why dissection was such a big deal. Royce explained that it meant cutting up a dead person's body, and the church had always taught them that harming the flesh was the work of the devil. Kiara understood why people in that time were disgusted by the idea. After deciding to work together with the prince, Kiara revealed her secret to him in an unexpected way. She explained that she had the memories of being a doctor from far in the future. Surprisingly, the prince thought it made sense. Kiara was taken aback that he believed her so quickly, but Cecil said he had no reason to doubt her. He then asked what they should do next. Wanting to improve the kingdom's medical system, he wondered if Kiara had something specific in mind. Without hesitation, Kiara asked if she could attend a human dissection. Cecil was puzzled, since she already knew human anatomy. Kiara explained that while she had studied it, all her knowledge came from her original world. In her future world, magic did not exist, and naturally neither did the idea of magical power. But in this world, magic was real, and people had different levels of magical energy. This could mean their bodies might be very different from the ones she had studied before. Cecil realized her knowledge might not fully apply if the body structures here were not the same. Kiara agreed, adding that before anything else, they needed to spread the right understanding of the human body among local healers. Eventually, she believed they could create a proper anatomy textbook for practical use. Cecil was startled by the idea at first, but then agreed. He said he might have a lead on how to start and promised to look into it. Kiara did not know what kind of lead it was, but she had already decided to become a doctor, so she was willing to do whatever she could. Royce reminded the prince that human dissection was forbidden in their country, which came as a surprise to Kiara. Cecil agreed and explained that only healers were allowed to perform dissections, and even then, only the highest-ranking ones had access to the more detailed anatomy books. Still, there was one other job besides healers that was allowed to do dissections. Royce already understood what the prince meant. Cecil explained that executioners, the people who carried out death sentences, were allowed to dissect the bodies of those who had been condemned. This was done to help them perform their work more accurately. The man they were going to visit was Jean Chambel, a famous executioner once feared as the Lord of Death. Cecil had heard that Jean's nephew had taken over his position while Jean retired, but Jean could still give them valuable help. Royce objected, saying the Chambel family was a lowly clan that made money from executions and torture. Cecil told him to relax, pointing out that the role of an executioner was officially given by the king to carry out the kingdom's death sentences. Kiara felt like she had heard the name Chambel before. Cecil noticed her reaction and asked what was wrong, wondering if she was also against meeting the executioners. Kiara said that was not the case. She explained that if they truly wanted to improve the kingdom's medical system, they could not afford to be too choosy about their methods. Cecil was pleased to hear her say that. Even so, Kiara had an uneasy feeling and wondered if everything would really turn out fine. The trio soon reached the Chambel estate. Royce trembled when he saw the dark manor, but to Kiara it looked grand and impressive. A man came out to greet Cecil. He was an old man who bowed deeply to show respect to the royal prince. Royce thought the man looked intimidating. Cecil asked how he had been, and the old man introduced himself as Jean Chambel. Jean said he was honored to meet the prince and also greeted the rest of the group. Cecil thanked him for the warm welcome, then noticed someone standing behind Jean. He asked if that person was part of the household. Kiara turned to see who it was and froze. She recognized the man instantly. He had a lonely expression and was none other than Francis Chambel, a major character from the story she knew. In the story, there had been a time when Kiara was about to be attacked by thugs hired by a rival faction. At the last moment, the cold-hearted executioner Francis saved her. Afterward, he pushed her away, warning that she would be cursed if she stayed near him. Still, Kiara wanted to thank him, so she visited him again and again. As they spent more time together, Francis slowly developed feelings for her. But Kiara was already in love with the prince. That did not matter to Francis. Even if he could not have her, he wanted to protect her. In secret, he began killing the people who wished her harm. With each life he took, his hands became bloodier, and his mind began to crumble. He swore that anything or anyone that hurt Kiara would die by his hands. Kiara remembered this part of the story well. The manga had started as a romance, but it turned into a horror tale the moment Francis appeared. To think she would actually meet such a dangerous person in real life. Jean introduced Francis as his grandson. Francis silently bowed in greeting. Cecil was surprised, since he had heard that Jean had no heir, and had given the position of executioner to his nephew instead. Jean only said that there were special circumstances, and suggested that they all go inside first. As they sat down to talk, Jean asked why they had come to his home, and why they had brought a young woman with them. Cecil said he had only one request. He wanted Kiara to attend a human dissection performed by the Chambel family. Jean asked if the young woman in front of him was the one. He could tell they were serious, but he wanted to know the reason. Cecil explained that it was for the progress of medicine in the country. He planned to change the medical system with Kiara's help, and as the first step, he wanted to create an accurate anatomy textbook. Jean began to respond, but before he could say much, someone called out his name from outside. When he went to check, he found two young siblings, Bill and Liza. He asked what was wrong. Liza quickly said her brother's arm was hurt and asked if they could take a look. Jean told Francis to examine it. Francis checked the arm and saw it was swollen. He asked Bill to move his wrist. Bill said he could, but it hurt a lot. Kiara noticed the swelling but saw no obvious deformity. She thought it might be a distal radius fracture, but without an x-ray, she could not be sure. Francis asked how it happened. Bill claimed his hand got stuck between pieces of lumber. However, Francis knew this kind of injury did not usually come from that. Fractures near the wrist were often caused by falling on an outstretched hand. He asked again what had really happened. Liza finally admitted that Ralph, the farmer's son, had pushed her brother. Bill had been trying to protect her after Ralph tried to drag her into the barn. Jean, worried, asked if Liza was unharmed. Liza said her brother had saved her in time. Bill then pleaded with them not to tell anyone, explaining that if rumors spread about what happened, Liza might never be able to marry. Jean promised to keep it a secret and said the most important thing was to focus on Bill's injury. Kiara and Royce realized then that Jean was a truly kind man. Francis diagnosed the injury as a radial fracture. The symptoms were mild, but if the broken bone was not set back in its proper position, Bill could lose the movement in his wrist. He explained that the procedure would be painful and asked Bill if he could handle it. Bill said he could. Francis then called for his grandfather's help. Kiara had been right. These people might have been executioners, but they also had medical knowledge. After the siblings left, Kiara found the Chambels impressive and asked how they had learned medicine. Jean explained that their family had worked as physicians while also serving as executioners. Over time, they had used the knowledge they gained from dissecting criminals to create their own special medical practice. Kiara noted that their treatment method clearly came from a deep understanding of anatomy. Jean felt humbled by her words and asked for her name. Kiara introduced herself as a surgeon and said she had come to learn the correct details of anatomy and share that knowledge with others. She then formally asked Jean to lend her their help. Just then, Francis spoke up and asked what use the knowledge Kiara mentioned really had. Kiara was confused because he had just treated the boy a moment ago. Francis explained that a fracture could heal in a single day with healing magic. He said that only those who could not afford a healer, usually the poor, were grateful for such old methods. He then turned to Cecil and praised his grand speech about the kingdom's medical progress. Still, he questioned whether Cecil truly cared for the kingdom if he was not working to create a place where every citizen could receive equal treatment. Jean tried to scold his grandson, but Cecil stopped him, saying that Francis's opinion had some truth. Francis then pointed out that their family had long been known as a clan of executioners. When they walked through town, people saw them as signs of misfortune, and they were not even allowed to shop there. Their special medicine had been developed only because they could not rely on doctors and had to cure illnesses on their own. In the end, he believed their medicine would become useless once healing magic gained proper recognition. He calmly suggested abandoning the ideas being discussed and instead returning to the royal capital. Jean then addressed the prince and apologized for his grandson's rude behavior. He promised to take full responsibility and asked for forgiveness. Cecil replied that he was not upset. What mattered more to him was learning the story behind Francis's attitude. Jean said it might be better to call it destiny rather than a simple story. He explained that his grandson had not become this way without a reason, and in a sense, it was an inevitable path. Meanwhile, Liza asked if her brother was really okay. Bill admitted that the treatment had hurt a lot, but he felt much better now compared to before. Liza felt guilty because she had not accepted Ralph's proposal earlier. Bill told her he would never allow his sister to marry someone like that. A group of children soon showed up nearby. Among them was Ralph, the very person the siblings had just been talking about. The children asked if Bill's injured arm was healing well. Bill recognized Ralph and became angry, thinking he had come to bother his sister again. Ralph said he was no longer interested in Liza and that he had business with Bill this time. He handed Bill a piece of paper with numbers written on it. Ralph explained that his nose still hurt from when Bill had punched him, which worried his mother. She had hired a town healer to cast a healing spell on him. Since Bill had caused the injury, Ralph said it was only right for him to pay the full cost of the treatment. Liza argued that it was unfair because her brother had only been protecting her. She thought demanding payment for that was completely unreasonable. Ralph replied that they could explain their side to the town council as he had already reported what happened. If they wanted, they could even shout in public, just as Liza had done when she thought Ralph and his friends were attacking her. This made Bill furious and he tried to fight back, but his injuries made it easy for Ralph and his friends to overpower him. Ralph then kicked Bill's injured arm, making the pain worse. Liza begged them to stop. Ralph warned them that this was what happened when poor people acted out of place, and he reminded them to pay the bill. Liza turned to check on her brother, but all Bill could say was that Ralph and his friends would pay for what they had done. Meanwhile, Jean explained that the executioner's family had been avoided for many years, and the only way for a son of an executioner to survive was to continue the same role. Yet Francis's father, Jean's son, wanted something different. He dreamed of the outside world and decided to become an actor. He left home, chose a false name, and worked as an apprentice in a local theater group. His talent grew, and within a few years he became a well-known actor. He later married the director's daughter, and they had a child named Francis. Life seemed steady until Jean's son admitted his true background to his wife. The director reacted with anger, calling them disgraceful. He said he could not accept that his daughter had lived with an executioner for years, and even had a child with him. He warned that if others discovered their secret, the troupe's reputation would be ruined for allowing an executioner on stage. Jean's son was cast out, and Francis was abandoned to Jean's care like an unwanted stray. Jean believed his son never returned because of wounded pride. Instead, he wandered from place to place. One day, he was attacked by a thief and left with wounds that allowed him only 5 days to live. During that time, young Francis went from healer to healer, pleading for help to save his father. None agreed, for they feared touching the body of a reaper would drive away their other patients. Kiara then remembered Francis's words about wanting a world where everyone could receive equal care. Cecil asked if that was when Jean raised Francis. Jean answered that he had taught the boy everything needed to survive as an executioner. He added that Francis would take on the official position the next month, for no other path remained for him. Jean then turned to Kiara and gave her permission to attend an autopsy, saying his nephew would help if asked. Still, he warned her to stop getting involved afterward. If others learned she had worked with the Reaper's family, no one would listen to her knowledge, no matter how correct it might be. Instead, he offered her access to past autopsy records, though he admitted he did not know if they would be enough for her. At that moment, heavy rain poured down outside, and Jean suggested they remain for the night. In his own room, Francis remembered how Cecil once talked with Kiara about changing the kingdom's medical system. Their first step was to create a reliable book on human anatomy. Francis thought the idea was absurd. He questioned who Kiara could even save with something like that. Meanwhile, Kiara thought about how Francis's father had died because of people's prejudice. This might have been the reason why Francis grew close to the Kiara in the original story, since she was the only one who treated him like everyone else. She doubted he had any reason to feel the same toward her now. More importantly, she studied the autopsy records she had just received. As she expected, the Chambel family's records were on a completely different level. The function of muscles, the roots of blood vessels and nerves, and the shapes of organs were all written down with perfect accuracy. From what she read, there was no difference between the anatomy of humans in this world and those from Earth. Still, she wondered what truly decided a person's magical power. While she was thinking, noises echoed from the hallway. She went to check and found Frances speaking with the siblings she had seen before. Jean appeared from behind in a strange way and asked why the two looked so badly hurt. He wanted to know what had happened. Bill admitted that Ralph and his friends had cornered them again and struck his already broken arm. After that, the pain grew stronger and harder to bear. Kiara already suspected this was the case. Frances then guided Bill to the treatment room. He noticed the boy's wrist looked more swollen than before. He felt for an arterial pulse and asked the boy if he could sense his touch. Suddenly, Bill cried out in sharp pain and begged if they could do something about it. Frances confirmed that Bill's condition had not changed much since the last check. The blood was still flowing and there were no signs of lost feeling or paralysis. Yet the pain was severe and even Jean could clearly see it. For now, Frances suggested placing something cold on the injured arm and letting the boy rest until the swelling lessened. He also told Bill to hold his arm higher than his heart so the swelling would go down faster. Just then, Kiara stepped in and told him to wait. She asked the boy how long his arm had been hurting. Bill explained that the pain had started that evening. Kiara guessed it had been about 6 hours already. She carefully moved the boy's arm, and Bill let out a painful groan. Frances grew angry and questioned what she was doing. When Kiara noticed how much pain the boy felt when the arm was stretched, she concluded that he was showing signs of compartment syndrome. She said it was very likely that he had it. Frances looked uncertain, so Kiara explained further. She said it was a condition where an injury caused the muscles to swell, pressing against the nerves and blood vessels. At first, the only sign would be severe pain, but if ignored, the blood flow could stop and the arm could begin to die. Hearing this, the boy's sister started crying. Kiara added that raising the arm would only make the blood flow worse, so treatment needed to start right away. Frances told her to wait. He believed the pain was not only from a simple fracture, but still thought rest would help. Kiara argued that if they waited for the blood flow to stop, it would already be too late. Frances was left without words at her sudden determination. Kiara explained that the longer they delayed, the greater the risk of lasting problems like stiff muscles and damaged nerves. That was why treatment had to begin the moment they suspected the condition. When Frances asked what she planned to do, Kiara said she would perform a fasciotomy. She explained they would cut the fascia to release the pressure on the nerves and blood vessels. Frances could not believe what he heard, since he had never known about such a treatment. Kiara then faced him and insisted that it was not nonsense. She reminded him that it was his own family who had preserved such detailed records of the human body. Jean stepped in and explained that he had treated patients before who showed the same signs as Bill. Some of those people had lost their lives, while others were forced to have their limbs removed. If Bill truly had compartment syndrome, then the situation made sense. Still, the old man wanted to understand how the fasciotomy worked. Kiara explained that the procedure involved making a cut on the palm side of the arm and slicing through the outer layer of tissue called the superficial fascia. Frances could not believe his grandfather was trusting her. He refused to rely on the words of a noble girl. Yet her explanation echoed in his mind. Against his pride, he admitted that her story seemed reasonable. Kiara finished by pointing out that Bill would face great pain after the procedure and asked if he could endure it. Bill declared that he was willing to go through anything as long as he did not lose his arm. Kiara assured him that she would handle it and promised to save his arm so he could settle things with Ralph later. The problem was that she lacked one important item: she had no anesthesia. At that moment, Cecil appeared and asked if she was searching for what he held in his hand. Kiara was surprised to see that the prince had been carrying ether all along. Cecil explained that Kiara often attracted trouble, so he kept it with him just in case. Royce felt uneasy about how prepared the prince was. Kiara's face lit up with relief as she thanked Cecil, and her sudden charm left the prince stumbling over his words. Kiara then called Frances to assist her in preparing the tools. Frances questioned why she had chosen him. Kiara reminded him that he was the first one to examine Bill, so he should see the case through until the end. She told him to stop sulking and take action. Frances finally agreed. Several weeks later in the town, Ralph remembered how he once made Bill trip and cry, and the thought made him laugh. One of his friends said Bill acted too proud just because his father held a powerful seat in the council. Ralph wanted to call them all losers. At that moment, Ralph's father showed up looking for him. He was angry, and Ralph asked what he wanted. His father was stunned that Ralph would even ask, since he was the one who had something to answer for. Standing behind him was Bill, glaring straight at Ralph. The sight left Ralph shocked. His friends turned their faces away, and that told Bill they had betrayed him by running to his father. He could not believe they had snitched on him. Bill's fist suddenly struck Ralph across the face, knocking him to the ground. Ralph asked what he was doing, but Bill said it was payback for the injury to his left hand. He also warned that he would return and use that same hand's fist to repay what had been done to his sister. He told Ralph to be ready when the time came. Later, Royce explained that after paying for Bill's treatment, Ralph had been sent to his mother's family home for discipline. He also assured everyone that no revenge would follow since he had already spoken with Ralph's relatives and friends. Kiara was caught off guard, as she never expected Royce to be the kind of man who worked quietly in the background while pulling strings. Royce said it came from his long years of cleaning up the prince's troubles. Still, he could hardly believe he was stuck in the countryside while the prince lived comfortably back in the capital. After the commotion, Kiara spent her days moving between the capital and the Chambel family estate to check on Bill. His fracture still needed time to heal, but his recovery moved along well. Before long, she would no longer need to visit him so often. The only real problem she faced was the sharp glare she always received from Francis. It was so constant that she began to wonder if she had done something wrong to him. From a distance, Francis remembered how skillfully Kiara had handled the anesthesia and fasciotomy, yet something else stayed on his mind. After the surgery, Kiara had admitted that she would never have understood compartment syndrome or been able to operate on Bill without knowing anatomy. She had then asked if he still thought her knowledge was useless. Her bold remark left him blushing. Until then, he had assumed she was only a spoiled noblewoman who knew nothing. Jean soon noticed that his grandson had started showing interest in Kiara. Francis quickly denied it and called her strange. Jean agreed she was unusual since her skills and learning were seen as worthless in the kingdom. He could already imagine enemies turning against her in the future. For that reason, he planned to support her himself. Francis asked in disbelief if his grandfather truly meant it. Jean confirmed that he did, which was why he wanted Francis to help Kiara in his place. This left Francis unsettled because he was supposed to be named the next executioner the following month. Jean shook his head and reminded him that the choice was his alone. He told Francis to follow the path he believed was right. Those words reminded Francis of his father. He thought about it in silence for a while before finally walking toward Kiara. Meanwhile, Federica protested against marrying Richard after she had been humiliated in front of others. She asked her parents to cancel the engagement. Her father explained that the promise with the Felsen family had been made years ago. Federica argued that the agreement was between her sister and Richard and had nothing to do with her. Her father then placed the blame on her mother, while her mother accused him of failing to defend Kiara on his own. The couple argued back and forth, giving Federica the chance to leave the room. She walked away feeling angry and wondered why the prince had chosen her sister instead of her when she believed she was better in both appearance and skill. Even if she married someone like Richard, she thought she would still end up unhappy. At that moment, a servant saw Federica walking by and said the timing was perfect. A visitor from the royal palace had arrived for her. The woman introduced herself as Guise, who served Queen Theresine. She said she had an important request for Federica. Federica stood surprised and questioned why it had to be her. At the academy, Eric tried to ask his classmates about the next lecture. They looked uneasy and walked away, ignoring him. Soon after, two classmates came over and told him that a troubling rumor was spreading about him. They said people were claiming that Eric and his father had dealings with shady people, which insulted Dr. Dohan. Eric was shocked and grew angry, wondering who dared to spread such lies. The classmates explained that it was Dohan's assistants who told everyone. Eric tried to defend himself, saying that it was Dohan who had planned to abandon his father, but no one cared about the truth. They only warned him to be cautious if he truly wished to become a healer. On his way home, Eric admitted to himself that Kiara did seem suspicious. If the rumor about her and the prince was true, it would cause a huge scandal. Still, he could not forget that her surgery had saved his father's life. To call that the work of a fraud was impossible. Just when Eric thought he could finally forget about Kiara, he met someone familiar stepping out of a nearby shop. To his surprise, it was the prince walking calmly through the town. Cecil greeted him with a cheerful smile, and Eric returned the greeting while asking why he was outside the palace. The prince explained that Kiara had asked him for a favor and sent him to pick up an item from a craftsman in her place. Eric could hardly believe that Kiara had the nerve to make the nation's prince run errands for her. A moment later, Francis appeared and apologized to the prince for keeping him waiting. Eric was taken aback by his striking looks and quickly asked about his identity. Cecil explained that Francis was Kiara's assistant. He also introduced Eric to Francis as the general's son and a healer in training at the academy. Before they could continue, the sound of squeals filled the street. Several girls had noticed the two handsome men, and their excitement drew unwanted attention. Concerned, Eric quickly grabbed the prince's luggage and urged them to leave before the crowd grew larger. The three men soon reached the front of an old mansion. Cecil explained that he had purchased the place, which used to be a healer's building. He said he planned to open his own clinic there once the preparations were complete. Eric, however, looked at the rundown structure with doubt. It looked nothing like a clinic, and he wondered if any patients would even come. At that moment, a group of children came running past, shouting about a witch. Kiara appeared, chasing them away and scolding them for playing on private property. Cecil sighed and said it was the same group of children again. He explained that the old building had been their playground for a long time, and they still sneaked inside even after he bought it. Suddenly, one of the children tripped. His older brother grabbed his left arm and urged him to run, but the boy screamed in pain and began to cry. The other children asked what was wrong, and he said he was hurt. The older brother insisted that he had only pulled him a little. Kiara walked over and asked what had happened. The children turned pale, apologized, and begged her not to harm them. The older brother even asked her to spare his younger brother. Kiara then looked at the injured child and told him to lift both arms. He tried but could only raise his right arm. Kiara explained that his left arm must have been injured when it was pulled. The older brother stood in shock. Soon the prince and the others arrived to see what was going on. Kiara was surprised to find Eric with them and asked why he was there, but Cecil told her he would explain later and wanted to know the situation first. Kiara explained that the boy most likely had a pulled elbow. She told them that young children had weaker joints, and if someone pulled their arms too hard, the elbow bone could slip out of its ligament. Hearing this, the older brother felt guilty and blamed himself, but Kiara told him to leave everything to her. She turned to the boy and said it would only sting for a moment. Then she gently moved his arm and a small cracking sound followed. Kiara said it was done and asked if it still hurt. The boy lifted both of his arms with ease. The children were amazed, and even Eric stared in shock. Kiara explained that she had put the bone back into place and assured them the boy could now move his arms normally. The older brother thanked her, but Kiara told him to fetch their mother or father so she could explain what had happened. He promised to bring their mother and apologized again for trespassing. Kiara said it was fine and reminded them to be careful not to fall again. Watching everything, Eric realized that Kiara's skills were truly real. Afterward, the children's mother came to give her thanks. Kiara returned to the mansion to start cleaning. Eric wanted to ask something, but Francis spoke first. He asked how Kiara knew that the child had a dislocated bone and how it was treated. Kiara reminded them that young children's bones were still underdeveloped. When she tried to explain more, Cecil stepped in and said Eric had come a long way to see them, so the harder details could wait for later. Eric replied that he had only carried the package. Kiara's attention then went to what he held, and she eagerly asked if it was the prototype. Cecil suggested they take a look. Kiara thanked Eric for bringing it, and when he asked what it was, she opened the case. Inside were surgical tools she had requested a craftsman to prepare. She grew excited as she saw tweezers, forceps, needle holders, a scalpel, injection needles, and syringes. Eric admitted the set looked impressive. Cecil reminded her that they were still only prototypes, so she should let him know if changes were needed. Kiara decided to test the tools and told Francis to bring out the item she had requested earlier. Francis returned with a young pig, its skin still intact but completely shaved. Eric, puzzled, asked what the pig was for. Kiara explained that it was for practicing suturing since pig skin was very close to human skin and worked well for training. Francis agreed, saying the cut and the thickness of the skin felt much like a human's. Eric was shocked and asked if they were serious. Kiara did not give a clear reply and instead began to test the tools. She first used a scalpel to make an incision on the surface. The testing continued until Kiara examined the tweezers, needles, and threads. The men stayed quiet as they observed. Kiara confirmed that the suturing went smoothly, and the tweezers held a steady grip. She agreed the tools were well made, which pleased Cecil. Yet Kiara found one problem. When she tugged the thread, it snapped apart. She explained that the thread needed improvement, as it did not pass through skin tissue easily and lacked strength. Eric thought about whether thicker threads could solve the issue. Kiara chose to demonstrate with one. As she pierced the skin with the thicker thread, Eric noticed something was wrong. Kiara admitted the thicker thread was stronger, but it also strained the skin more, which made scarring worse. She explained that when stitching the outer layer of skin, the best choice was the finest strong thread since it reduced visible scars. She also pointed out that thicker thread caused more pain. Eric then realized her point. Cecil decided to seek advice from a thread maker for better sutures. Eric stayed silent, realizing he had not even thought about scars or comfort after treatment. He now saw how Kiara always placed her patients' well-being first. Unlike other healers who relied on magic without truly facing those they treated, Eric made up his mind. He approached Kiara and admitted his past mistakes. He asked her to teach him her medical skills. Both Kiara and Cecil were left surprised by his request. Eric declared he wished to support his father and brothers. He even announced he would leave the academy and begged her to take him as a student. Kiara could not hide her shock. Eric asked Kiara to take him as her student, and he kept begging for it. Kiara was shocked at first but forced herself to stay calm. She refused his request and told him to stop saying foolish things and just attend the academy. She said she would not be able to face the general otherwise. Eric said he was serious and Kiara knew he truly was. If she had the gift of magic, She would have been the first to line up and learn healing spells. Healing magic was the most valuable skill because a wound could be treated just by holding the patient's hand. With that kind of power, Eric would not even need to study stitching wounds. Eric reminded her that such healing magic had not been enough to save his father. Kiara admitted that even she would not have been able to save the general's life alone. Eric then remembered the doctor who had used magic on his father before. Kiara explained that there was indeed a problem in the kingdom's medical system, which depended too much on magic. Still, healing magic was an amazing skill. If Eric already had the chance to learn it, he should not let such an opportunity slip away. Eric did not know what else to say. At that moment, Cecil suggested that Eric could study under Kiara while still attending the academy. He said this would settle the problem. Kiara, however, feared that Eric would be shunned even more if people learned he was linked to her. Cecil said that the choice would depend on Eric's own resolve. Eric then remembered the doubtful looks he had received earlier that morning. With his mind made up, he declared that he was ready for it and once again asked Kiara to accept him as her student. Kiara frowned and admitted she was never good at training beginners, yet she agreed and said she would be counting on him from then on. Eric felt joy and looked forward to learning from her. Meanwhile, a secret meeting took place where they discovered that Kiara Bellworth had been the one to treat General Gerald. They could not believe a young girl had cured an illness that even skilled healers had failed to handle. They also heard that Prince Cecil kept Kiara close to him, and some began to suspect he was planning something. Everyone was then told to stay quiet. It was the Queen who spoke. She said they had already done their own investigation on Kiara and asked her handmaiden, a countess named Guise, to present the report. Guise explained that Kiara was the eldest daughter of House Bellworth. She was born without magical power and often stayed inside their house. Even though she had already reached the right age, she rarely joined social events and was distant even from her own family. She could not have possibly gained any real medical knowledge. Guise confirmed this by speaking directly with a member of the Bellworth family, so there was no doubt in their findings. Another noble said that it was just as they expected. The prince must have been planning something with his companions. They had heard the group making noise, claiming the general's condition became worse after Dr. Dohan had treated him. Those words made it sound like all healers were untrustworthy. They could not accept that a young woman doctor had saved the nation's hero. Still, they knew the public would enjoy such a tale. They also heard that Prince Cecil had ties to the medical city of Ascendia, and perhaps he wanted to use the recent event as an excuse to bring in foreign doctors. In their eyes, Kiara was nothing more than one of the prince's pawns. Even so, the queen believed Cecil had no other plan beyond letting a powerless girl play the role of a healer. At that moment, a nobleman named Zeram asked the queen to leave the matter in his hands. He said he already had the right pawns ready. If everything went as planned, both Prince Cecil and Kiara would fall. Later, along the main street of the capital, the siblings Rhys and Bill walked while looking around in wonder. Rhys grew so excited that Bill reminded her not to make it too obvious they came from the countryside. He also warned her not to wander off alone. With the clinic set to open soon, the siblings decided to live and work on site. Frances would be visiting the clinic as well, so it was a great help to have two people assisting her with the situation. Even so, Rhys and Bill felt overwhelmed by their new life in the city. Kiara decided to take the lead and guided the siblings back toward the mansion. She believed they had already bought enough and promised to show them around again on their next free day. Rhys asked if she was certain, while Bill reminded her not to push herself since she was already busy. Kiara explained that she simply wanted them to grow familiar with the capital as soon as possible. She then brought them through an alleyway she knew was a shortcut, and the siblings followed closely behind her. In her past life, most interns had been afraid of her. She never had to look after anyone, yet being relied on did not feel unpleasant at all. As they continued, Bill noted that the path looked deserted and wondered if it was dangerous for a lady like Kiara to pass through it. Kiara reassured him that the area was safe since soldiers often patrolled there. She even said that the Western Market was far more dangerous. Right after she spoke, suspicious men suddenly appeared and surrounded them. Kiara was startled as she looked around. The men wore hoods and masks that hid their faces. She thought about who they might be and when they had begun following them. One of the men stepped forward and pointed a blade at her. He declared that their master wanted her presence and ordered her to follow if she wished to avoid harm. Soon, Kiara was taken to a secluded mansion. She demanded to know what was happening and who these people were, but no one answered her. She also asked about the siblings and swore that she would make them pay if the two had been harmed. They finally reached an office where a woman sat on a chair while another stood beside her. Kiara wondered where she had been taken. The man who brought her there reported to the woman named Tylan that they had delivered the girl they asked for. The woman beside Tylan praised them and ordered them to stay on standby. Kiara wanted to know who these people were. The seated woman politely greeted Kiara and apologized for calling her so suddenly. She explained that she came from one of the 4 great ducal houses of the Taiku Empire. Her name was Tylin and she served the White Marquis. She again apologized for their discourtesy. Kiara grew more confused after hearing that they came from the Taiku Empire. If she remembered right, that nation lay across the eastern seas. She wondered why people from such a distant land had come to the kingdom. Tylin explained that they had brought Kiara there because they had something to request. They had already heard that she possessed rare medical knowledge. Kiara was startled and wondered how they had learned such a thing. Tylin, seeing her reaction, assumed their information was true. She then asked if Kiara could examine the eyes of the noble lady sitting before them. Tylin introduced her as Jinhua, the daughter of the White Marquis. Around 3 months earlier, Jinhua developed a condition that harmed her eyes. Sadly, the medicine of their land could not cure it. They even traveled to the medical city of Ascendia across the sea, but the doctors there could only shake their heads and say there was no cure. Their only hope was to trust in the miracles of Lowenberg's healing magic, which was why they came to the kingdom. Kiara assumed Jinhua had already been treated with healing magic, but Tylin quickly explained that it had no effect. Kiara found that hard to believe. She asked Jinhua to recall her symptoms or any possible cause, but Jinhua stayed silent. Kiara thought perhaps Jinhua could not hear her. Tylin then explained that her young mistress came from noble blood and did not speak directly to those of lower rank. She also added that the condition threatening Jinhua's eyes might even affect the future of their household. Until they could prove that Kiara was a doctor worthy of trust, they would not reveal further details. Kiara felt shocked. They wanted her to examine a patient without telling her anything about the illness. She even thought about how she had been taken by force and now was being told to treat someone without explanation. She could not understand why it had to be her. Her angry thoughts drew the attention of the hooded men who drew their blades. Tylin also warned her that she had no choice in this matter. If she wished for her companions to remain safe, she needed to obey. With no other option, Kiara agreed to examine the patient but asked for the veil to be lifted first. Under the veil appeared a strong-looking woman with striking eyes. Kiara noticed they seemed close in age, and at first glance there appeared to be nothing wrong with her. She then carefully studied Jinhua's eyes from several angles. Tylin nervously asked what she was doing, but Kiara focused on her examination and ignored her. The problem was nearly impossible to see from the front, yet Kiara already had a guess. She then instructed Jinhua to follow her finger with her eyes. After the examination, Kiara said she had noticed a few things. She asked if Jinhua saw objects double whenever she looked upward. Tylin was shocked and wondered how Kiara even reached such a conclusion. Kiara explained that she had noticed a small problem in Jinhua's right eye when it moved upward. The two eyes did not move together, and when that happened, the focal points failed to match, which led to double vision. Tylin found it hard to believe Kiara could point out the symptoms so clearly. Still, the doctors from Ascendia had already reached the same idea. Kiara then mentioned she had another question. She asked if Jinhua's right eye had ever been struck by a fist or something similar. This surprised Tylin and the men standing behind Kiara. Kiara explained that although it was faint, she could see a small depression in Jinhua's right upper eyelid. From that, she suspected Jinhua might have suffered an orbital floor fracture. Tylin asked what that meant. Kiara explained that the bony socket holding the eyeball was called the orbit. When the thin bottom portion of those bones broke, it was called an orbital floor fracture. Tylin wondered how such a break made Kiara think Jinhua had been hit. Kiara explained that since the bone at the bottom of the orbit was very thin, it could break easily when strong pressure was applied to the eye. When that happened, the fat and muscle around the eye could get trapped in the fractured area, causing problems such as the eye sinking deeper into the socket or the eye moving poorly. That was why she asked if Jinhua had been struck, since this type of injury usually came from a direct hit to the face. Tylin was left speechless. He had called for Kiara out of desperation, but now he saw she was truly different from what he expected. At last, Jinhua spoke and praised Kiara for her sharp mind. Tylin was surprised to see his mistress rise and speak. Jinhua then admitted she had only been testing Kiara. She explained that because of her situation, she could not reveal everything to just anyone. Kiara thought about it and believed only one reason fit. An injured woman would never speak of such matters in public. Jinhua said Kiara was right. She then revealed that 3 months earlier she had been attacked by a man she did not know. Soon after, Cecil received reports that the queen was plotting something. Royce explained that the queen had recently gathered the nobles and healers who were loyal to her, as if she were responding to Cecil's recent actions. Cecil could not believe that the queen had nothing better to do than try to get in his way. Royce assumed she was growing desperate now that Cecil had returned. He warned Cecil to be careful since he doubted that Cecil was the only target. That made Cecil think of Kiara. Royce confirmed that rumors about the two of them had already spread throughout the court. He said they were being watched closely, so Kiara should keep a low profile. Cecil promised he would warn her. He hated feeling helpless, especially when it involved a patient. The real problem was whether Kiara would even listen to him. In the Taiku Empire, talented daughters from noble families were chosen as candidates for crown princess. After several years of selection, only the most outstanding one would be chosen. Tylin explained that Jinhua had been one of those candidates recommended by the White family. Kiara was shocked to hear that. Tylin went on to describe Jinhua as remarkable in beauty, academics, and martial arts. Because of this, she had long been the emperor's favorite since childhood. Many even believed that the position of crown princess was already hers, even before the official selection. However, 3 months earlier, Jinhua's carriage was attacked by bandits on her way to a temple at the outskirts of the capital. She was supposed to visit her late master's grave. Suddenly, unknown horsemen began chasing them. With only a few guards and no escape route, the carriage was quickly surrounded. Tylin said that very few would dare to attack a carriage marked with the White family's crest, so it was most likely a plan by a rival faction that wanted to eliminate Jinhua. After seeing how they reached the kingdom, Kiara believed they were finally safe after managing to escape. Jinhua gave a confident look and said she had easily defeated their attackers. Kiara became curious about what she meant, and Jinhua proudly shared that those thugs were no match for her skills. She said she had taken down half of them using her bow and finished the rest with her sword until the villains ran away in fear. However, during the fight, Jinhua was hit in her right eye. Even after the swelling faded, her eye stayed sunken, and she suffered from double vision. Tylin became worried that if people learned Jinhua had been attacked and her face was damaged, her chances in the upcoming selection would greatly drop. She wondered if there was any way to heal her lady's eye. Kiara thought for a while and explained that there was a possible way. She said that in cases where the bone under the eye was fractured, the trapped tissue only needed to be placed back in its proper spot. If that was done, Jinhua's vision might recover. Still, Kiara warned that it would not be easy. Treating an orbital floor fracture required making a small cut on the face. Tylin grew upset after hearing that and worried about using a blade on her lady's face. Kiara remained calm and explained that the surgery had to be done inside the eye socket and required general anesthesia. She also warned that it carried a risk of death due to possible side effects. If they chose to go through with the treatment, they had to be ready for the worst outcome. Kiara then noted that the sunken area around the eye was barely noticeable, and that Jinhua's eye movement was only slightly affected. She wondered if it was truly worth the danger. She remembered that the general and Bill had undergone surgeries because their situations had been life-threatening, but the case before her was different. It was not something she could suggest without serious thought. So Kiara told them it was a choice that needed careful discussion before making any decision. At that moment, a blade suddenly stopped right in front of Kiara's face. Tylin quickly asked the guard what he thought he was doing. The guard, whose name was Yuan, said they should not be fooled by Kiara's words. He argued that there was no way someone as young as her could be a doctor. He accused her of making excuses in advance for when she failed. He even doubted her explanation about the orbital floor fracture she mentioned. Yuan also said they could not easily trust people from this kingdom because the healers there had recently demanded a ridiculous amount of payment, yet still failed to cure their young lady. He shouted that those healers even tried to justify their failure by saying their magic did not work on foreigners. Because of that, he believed Kiara only planned to perform a fake treatment and run away with their money. Kiara stayed calm and explained that surgery involved cutting into a person's body. She stepped closer to the blade and said that was why surgeons like her always had to think carefully about whether a procedure was truly helpful to the patient. They had to consider the possible harm it might cause. With the blade's tip pressing against her neck, she said that no matter how skilled a surgery was, if it did not truly help, it would only leave the patient hurt. That was a principle she refused to have questioned by someone who drew his sword so carelessly. Angered, she told the guard to come back when he had matured, calling him a foolish child. Yuan stood frozen, unable to speak. Jinhua, furious, scolded him for drawing his sword without permission and reminded him that Kiara was their guest. The guard immediately apologized. Kiara noticed Jinhua's trembling fist and went to apologize as well, saying she did not mind what had happened. Jinhua said Kiara's explanation had been helpful, but the treatment itself was something too difficult for her to accept. She said she had no plans to let anyone cut her face open. Even if her eye looked slightly sunken, she still believed her beauty was not lesser than other girls. Her father had told her to find a permanent fix, which was why she traveled so far to a foreign land. But now she realized it was time to give up and return home. She asked Tylin if he understood, and the attendant quietly obeyed without question. Turning to Kiara with a gentle smile, Jinhua said it was thanks to her that she finally made up her mind. She wished that they could meet again someday. Soon after, Bill apologized for failing to protect Kiara. Francis said it would have happened either way since some people were bold enough to threaten others even in broad daylight. Cecil agreed but was still thankful that everyone was safe. However, he knew they needed to find out who those people were. After the consultation, Bill and Reese were finally released. They had been locked inside a nearby warehouse but were not harmed. Even so, Kiara knew she should tell the others who the kidnappers were. For now, she only shared that one of them was a patient and that she was called there to give a consultation. She apologized and said she could not reveal anything more. Eric became upset and asked why she was protecting those people, saying they would not even know if she told anyone. Francis agreed, adding that criminals did not deserve forgiveness. Kiara simply pinched their cheeks and reminded them that a doctor must always respect a patient's privacy, even after death. She told them to keep that in mind. After leaving the room, Kiara remembered the words of Tilin and Jinhua. She recalled how Jinhua's position in the Crown Princess selection might suffer if rumors spread. Jinhua also mentioned that she might just give up on her treatment. Kiara reminded herself not to recommend surgery too easily. She believed she had made the right choice. Yet she still wondered if there had been another way. She told herself to stop thinking about it since it was already over. Just then, Cecil entered her room and asked if she had a moment to spare. Cecil ended up telling Kiara that the Queen might also be targeting her. Though it was only a possibility, he warned her to be careful. Kiara realized that things had turned into a power struggle between the Queen and the First Prince. In the manga, her past self had gotten involved in the same political mess, and it had ended in a bloody conflict. Still, she had been drinking at that time, so she could barely remember what she had read while drunk. Then Cecil leaned forward and lifted Kiara's chin. The sudden action surprised her. He had simply noticed a small wound on her neck and asked what had happened. Kiara, who thought he was about to kiss her, blushed and covered her neck. She explained that it was just a scratch from when someone pointed a sword at her. Cecil was shocked to hear that. Kiara quickly assured him she wasn't hurt and told him not to worry. Cecil said he wouldn't force her to talk about what happened earlier, but he hoped she would share any information with him from now on. He said he wanted to protect her and asked her to remember that. Kiara's face turned red from the sudden warmth in his words. Before she could say anything, Reese came in saying someone was looking for her. When Kiara asked what was wrong, Reese said she had a visitor. Jinhua then appeared and greeted Kiara with a bright smile. Kiara was surprised to see her alone and asked what happened to her companions. Jinhua explained that she left them behind because she couldn't get treatment if they were with her. Confused, Kiara asked what she meant. Jinhua calmly said she wanted Kiara to perform the surgery on her eye. The two sat down to talk. Jinhua agreed that her symptoms might be minor and she still had a good chance of being chosen as the crown princess. Even so, she wanted her eye to be treated no matter what. When Kiara asked why, Jinhua slowly touched her right eye and said she could not forget that terrible event. The rough voices of men, the sound of horses, and the screams of her attendants still echoed in her mind. Kiara realized that Jinhua was deeply traumatized. Back then, Jinhua had been too focused on staying alive to feel fear. But about a month later, when the swelling on her face went down, the memories of the attack suddenly came flooding back. She could not stop shaking. At first, she thought the memories would fade soon. But no matter what she tried to think about, whenever her vision blurred or when she saw her reflection in the mirror, the memory returned. Now, even the sight of a bow or sword made her tremble. Kiara understood that was why Jinhua had been shaking before. It was also why she could not bring herself to remove her eye patch. Her father had seen her condition and ordered her to get her eye treated right away. When she refused, he drove her out of the house. She then asked Kiara if her story sounded pathetic. Kiara asked if she had ever told Tilin or her family about the painful memories of the attack. Jinhua explained that her father was a cold man. The moment he realized she was no longer useful as a crown princess, he would abandon her without a second thought. The retainers only served her because she was known as the beautiful and brave princess. Kiara realized Jinhua had been suffering alone all this time. Jinhua admitted it. She even confessed that there were times she thought everything would be easier if she just removed her eye herself. Then she reached out and held Kiara's hand. She said her way of thinking had changed since coming to this country and meeting Kiara. She understood now that her problem was not just with her eye, but also with her heart. She knew fixing her right eye would not erase everything, but she still wanted to face it and move forward. She knew the risks but was determined. So she asked Kiara to treat her eye. Kiara noticed that the sunken area around Jinhua's eye was barely visible and her vision loss was quite minor. She wondered if it was truly worth risking such a dangerous surgery. She then apologized for judging Jinhua's pain by her own standards. In the end, she agreed to perform the surgery and promised to be the one to heal her right eye. Meanwhile, Cecil, who had been quietly listening the whole time, thought that things would not end well. Kiara told everyone that they would perform surgery on Jinhua the next morning. She said the Chambel family had already given them the reference materials and asked Eric and Francis to study and memorize the anatomy of the eye socket. Eric thought it was too soon, but Kiara explained that if people from the Taiku Empire found Jinhua, they might take her back before the surgery could happen. That was why they needed to act quickly. Francis then asked if an orbital floor fracture could really be fixed through surgery. He mentioned that if the orbital bone was too damaged, the tissues might just sink back again after being repositioned. Kiara agreed that it was indeed a problem. Even in modern times, doctors usually determine the severity of the fracture through imaging tests. If necessary, they would support the orbital floor with a balloon or a bioabsorbable plate. But in this era, there were no CT scans and plates did not exist at all. Kiara had to think of another way. She decided that she would make the final plan after examining the fracture herself. In any case, all preparations needed to be completed within one night. However, someone opposed the surgery. It was Cecil. He pointed out that Jinhua only learned about Kiara through an informant and that her story seemed strange. He urged them to consider the possibility that the queen might be involved. He warned that operating on a foreign noble was extremely risky, and if they failed, both countries might blame them. Kiara asked if he was suggesting that they abandon Jinhua. She argued that they would never be able to help anyone if they always avoided taking risks. Cecil replied that Jinhua would not die if they left her condition as it was. He reminded Kiara that this case was different from saving someone near death, and asked her to avoid unnecessary danger so they could continue their work as physicians. Kiara's face grew serious as she talked about how Jinhua truly wanted to fix her right eye so she could move on with her life. She said the surgery was not something unnecessary. Cecil was caught off guard by her words. Kiara apologized for acting on her own but said she could never turn her back on a patient in need. She bowed her head and told him to end their connection if it would cause trouble for him or the clinic. She only asked him to let her handle the patient and the situation herself. Cecil could only sigh and agree. He decided to return to the castle for the time being, saying they would talk about what to do next later on. Francis asked if Kiara was really sure about her decision. Kiara answered that she would do what had to be done, with or without the prince's help. Francis said that was not what he meant. He reminded her that the entire clinic was supported by the prince's money, which was why he asked if she was ready to lose that support. He also mentioned that the payment for the mansion's renovation was due soon. He showed her the amount they needed to cover the next month's expenses and asked if she even had that much on hand. Kiara crushed the papers in her hand and said they should focus on the patient first. She told everyone to worry about money later and start preparing instead. Eric quietly realized that Kiara was the last person who should ever be put in charge of managing anything. Outside the clinic, a man had been listening to their conversation. Once he confirmed that Jinhua had gone to Kiara's clinic, he decided to report everything right away to someone called Lord Zerum. Meanwhile, inside her room, Jinhua was about to wash her face when she heard noises from outside. She looked out the window and saw the same man standing below. Suddenly, her double vision returned. The world blurred before her eyes and she fell to her knees, feeling dizzy and weak. Even then, she told herself that no matter what happened or if her face never went back to normal, she would keep fighting. Tylon and the others were still searching for their young mistress. He was furious, while the other guards apologized, saying it was difficult to track Jinhua in the dark. Tylon told them to stop making excuses and to keep searching instead. Yuan decided to look for Jinhua on his own. As he walked, he thought about where she might have gone. Then he remembered something Jinhua once taught him about archery. She had told him that the first step was to clearly see the target. When people were afraid, they often looked away from their enemies. She said he must train himself to always look at his target straight in the eye. Thinking about her words, Yuan guessed that Jinhua might have gone to fix her own eye. But that seemed impossible. At that moment, someone spoke about how everyone seemed to be in a gloomy mood. Yuan recognized the voice. It belonged to the healer they met before. Tylon remembered his name was Zerum, and that they had already paid him for his services. Zerum told them not to be so defensive since he had some information to share. He asked if they had heard about a young girl who had been doing strange medical procedures on patients recently. He said this girl had powerful support behind her, making it hard to stop her. Tylon admitted they had heard of a girl who saved a patient that even skilled healers could not cure. Zerum laughed and called that story nonsense, saying the patient and the girl were secretly working together and the illness and surgery were both fake. Tylon replied that even if that rumor were true, it had nothing to do with them. If Zerum came only to spread gossip, she told him to leave. Zerum then smirked and asked if they really did not know that the same young girl was performing surgery on their princess at that very moment. The next morning, Jinhua was put to sleep under anesthesia for her surgery. Kiara took charge and asked Eric and Francis to assist her by handing over the instruments she needed. Bill went to his sister Reese and told her they were asked to wait until they were called. Reese decided to prepare a meal while waiting. Suddenly, they heard loud noises outside the clinic. To their surprise, Jinhua's attendants had arrived. Both of them panicked as they recognized the group and didn't know what to do. Tylon shouted, calling out Kiara. She demanded proof that their mistress was safe inside and warned that if they didn't get an answer soon, they would be forced to break in. Meanwhile, Zeram reported to the queen that Kiara planned to operate on the woman from the east. He warned that if Kiara failed, it would anger the Easterners and they might kill her in revenge. The queen, however, remained calm and said that Kiara might actually succeed, and if she did, it would only strengthen Cecil's position. Zeram quickly assured her that such a thing would never happen. He explained that Jinhua's injury was near her eyeball, and to fix it, Kiara would have to make an incision around the eye and work inside the eye socket. The queen called such a method barbaric. Zeram added that even if the treatment worked, Jinhua's face would likely end up scarred. Scarring the face of an unmarried noblewoman from another land was something that should never occur. The queen understood his reasoning. Whether Kiara succeeded or failed, it would still serve as a reason to attack. To her, a reckless ally like the Easterners was more troublesome than an enemy. She only hoped Cecil would soon regret his choices. Back at the clinic, the siblings tried to block the front door. A window suddenly shattered and Eric heard the sound. Francis said it was only a matter of time before the Easterners broke in. Despite the chaos, Kiara stayed focused on her patient. The fracture was worse than she had expected. A part of the lower eye socket bone was missing. Even if she put the tissue back in place, it would just sink into the hole. She had to find a way to fill the bone gap. She quickly announced a change of plans and told her assistants they would need to harvest rib cartilage. Confused, Eric asked why they needed rib cartilage for an eye surgery. Kiara explained that a section of the orbital floor bone was missing, so they would take rib cartilage and transplant it into the gap. Francis understood her reasoning and realized she planned to use another piece of bone to replace the missing part, though he wasn't sure if it would actually work in this case. At that moment, the Easterners managed to get inside. From the other side of the door, they heard Bill's voice telling them to remove their shoes and wear a hat and mask. Tylan and the others ignored the warning and pushed the operating room door wide open. Inside, they saw Kiara and her young mistress with blood dripping from her eye on her face. Kiara froze for a moment when she saw them looking at the young mistress's peeled skin and exposed flesh. She quickly told them not to come any closer. She explained that this was the surgery Jinhua had asked for herself, and that if they truly cared for her, they should not interfere. Tilan asked if she was really saying it was for their young mistress's sake. Kiara said that Jinhua was raised to become the crown prince's consort, and if her face ended up scarred, she would be seen as useless and unfit to marry into the royal family. For that reason, she had to protect her. Kiara then pointed a knife at Eric's throat and warned them to stay away from Jinhua, or Eric would die. Just then, a voice told them to stop. It was Cecil. He said it was probably their first time meeting and introduced himself as the kingdom's first prince. Tylan and the other Easterners were shocked and asked why a prince would be in such a small clinic. Cecil explained that he was the clinic's main investor and questioned why they had entered the operating room, which was supposed to be off-limits to anyone without permission. He also said that bringing out a weapon inside was unacceptable. If they truly wanted their young mistress to be cured, he told them to leave immediately. Tylan then remembered Zeram's words about Kiara having a powerful supporter. She couldn't believe that person was actually the first prince. Clicking her tongue, she said she understood, but warned that she would file a formal complaint with the ambassador later. Cecil said he understood and promised to take full responsibility for any problems that might happen in the clinic. With that, Tylan and the other Easterners finally left the room. Cecil apologized to the others for arriving late. Eric thanked him for saving them. Kiara asked why he had come, but Cecil said they should talk later and told them to focus on finishing the surgery. Kiara felt a bit relieved. She returned to her task and told the others to continue the operation. Everyone waited quietly outside the operating room. Tylan looked serious and torn. Cecil was relieved that he had told Royce to keep watch over the Taiku Empire's delegation. If he had arrived even a moment later, Kiara might have been struck down. He still could not believe how fearless she had been. A few moments later, several men in suits arrived after receiving a report from a citizen accusing the clinic of illegal activities under Kiara's name. They told everyone to leave the area at once. Cecil quickly stepped forward, introduced himself, and asked what the report was about. That was when Zeram appeared, saying he was the one who had filed the complaint. Cecil remembered that Zeram was the court physician, and Zeram confirmed it. He said he had heard that Kiara was harming the young lady from the Taiku Empire, so he came to see for himself. Cecil questioned what he meant by harming. He firmly explained that Kiara had been treating Jinhua's injury, and even had a signed document proving that the surgery was agreed upon by both sides. He demanded that Zeram take back his false claim. Zeram only laughed and repeated the word agreed. He argued that Jinhua was still too young to make such a decision and could not have properly consented to a risky procedure. The people from the east grew angry when they heard their young mistress being insulted. Zeram reminded everyone that her attendants had already tried to stop the surgery earlier. He added that leaving a scar on a young woman's face counted as assault, and if any mark remained, Kiara should face punishment like a criminal. Before the argument could go further, Francis stepped out of the operating room and announced that the surgery was finished. He said Jinhua was asking for her attendants. Inside the room, Kiara told Jinhua not to move too much yet. Jinhua said she was fine and needed to explain things to everyone outside. When Tylin and the others entered, they were stunned to see their mistress with a bandage over her right eye. They could hardly believe Kiara had actually used a blade on her face. Tylin admitted she had failed to understand how much Jinhua had suffered and had spoken without thinking. Jinhua, in turn, apologized for making her worry. Zeram entered the room and complained about how late they were. He called Jinhua a painful sight and accused Kiara of being cruel for leaving a scar on a woman's face. He then ordered the guards to arrest Kiara at once. Kiara, confused, asked what was going on. Jinhua stopped them and questioned if they were truly sure that a scar was left on her face. Zeram froze in confusion. Jinhua explained that she could not check herself in the mirror and asked everyone in the room to confirm it instead. She then removed her bandages and everyone gasped. Her face was completely smooth with no trace of any scar. Even Tylin was shocked and said out loud that there were no marks at all. Jinhua smiled, relieved to hear it. Zeram stood speechless, trying to understand what had happened. He thought it was impossible to treat an eye socket without cutting through the face and assumed the surgery must not have been done. But Tylin insisted that she had seen blood flow from her lady's face and asked Kiara what really happened. Kiara calmly explained that she treated the eye socket by making a cut through the mucous membrane under the eyelid. She said that in orbital surgery, aside from cutting through the skin below the eyelid, there was another way, by cutting inside the eyelid instead. While an external cut provided a wider and safer view, this time she had chosen the inner method, considering Jinhua's condition. That way, no scar would ever appear on her face. A while ago, Kiara told Jinhua that the surgery would be a bit harder than expected, but she still chose the method that would not leave a scar on Jinhua's face. Jinhua did not really care about the method and only wanted the most reliable one. Still, Kiara did not want her to decide her future based on whether she had a scar or not. She reminded her not to let a scar make her feel unwanted in her own home, and not to chase the throne just because she looked perfect. Kiara wanted Jinhua to live her life by her own choice. However, Kiara knew she could not tell yet if the surgery was a success. They had to watch Jinhua's recovery for a month before knowing for sure. If there were no signs of improvement, Kiara was ready to accept any blame. Zeram could not believe that a young girl had managed to perform such an advanced procedure. Kiara, clearly angry, asked how long he planned to stay in her clinic. She could not believe he and his men had barged into an unmarried woman's room and warned them that there would be consequences. The guards quickly left, pretending not to hear her, leaving Zeram behind. That was when Zeram realized that Kiara was starting to become a threat to them. He began thinking of ways to stop her before that happened. Cecil watched the man leave. Then he looked at Kiara as she gave Jinhua instructions for her recovery. At that moment, he understood how truly special Kiara was. With her, he believed his plans for the future would become far greater. 3 weeks after the surgery, Jinhua got examined. Kiara smiled and confirmed that the swelling in her face had finally gone down. Jinhua confirmed not feeling any pain, and she felt like the sinking in her eyes had finally returned to normal. With this, she claimed no one would complain. Tylin was glad. Jinhua claimed it was all thanks to her attendants frantically looking for the cure, or she would have never met Kiara. She also felt so self-depreciating that she refuses to trust her own attendants. She apologized to them. They all asked her not to think about that. Kiara then asked how was her double vision. She can see her eye movement looking fine, but she worries about the double vision. Jinhua then looked at the window and suggested testing things out. She asked Yuan to prepare her bow, and Yuan immediately handed it over. Jinhua closed her eyes as she recalled those painful and bloody memories. She then opened her eyes wide with determination and opened the window. Kiara asked what she was planning to do. Jinhua then raised her bow and pulled an arrow. Without hesitation, she fired a shot and hit the snooping bastard outside. Kiara asked what just happened. Jinhua confirmed the same man has been snooping around the clinic for the past 3 weeks. She found his presence super annoying, but now she finally managed to take care of him. Now she claims she can return to her country without worries. Kiara asked if she was really returning. Jinhua claimed she had decided. She confessed her body still trembled recalling that fated day, but Kiara had erased the curse that was carved in her. For that reason, she wanted to fight in her own country again. She told Kiara that this was a debt she wouldn't forget for the rest of her life. That night, Kiara learned that the man Jinhua had captured was actually a spy hired by Zeram. Kiara asked if Zeram was the man who barged into the operating room that day. Cecil claimed Zeram would probably continue monitoring her closely after that incident. He claimed it might be a better idea to raise walls around the estate. In the end, Kiara ended up relying on the prince again. And yet, she told him to cut her off if needed. Eric told her a while ago to apologize to the prince properly since cutting off ties meant their clinic would be out of business. She then bowed her head to Cecil and apologized for acting so selfishly. She claimed she never intended to cause him troubles, but he ended up helping her again. She claimed without AI support, the clinic can't continue to run. She promised to be more careful with her words in the future. She hoped he could continue cooperating with her, or rather her clinic. Cecil couldn't help but silently chuckle. He then asked why she was so devoted to her patients. He pointed out how she always tried to save her patients without regards for the danger. This time too, she did something reckless that could have costed her life. He asked what drives her so hard. Kiara mentioned how in her previous life, she lost her mother at a young age, and in her childhood she lived with just her father and grandfather. Cecil was surprised Kiara was talking about her previous life like this. Kiara then claimed that on top of that, her father was a busy surgeon, so she had no memories of spending time with him. However, her father, who was busy and relied upon by so many people, was her greatest pride. Someday she wanted to become a doctor like him, and together Tina should save patients all over the world, or so what she had imagined in her childish dreams. However, on her 10th birthday, her father collapsed right in front of her. It was likely due to his chronic overwork, and of all times it just had to be when only he and her were at home. As a helpless child, she couldn't do anything. Her body just froze as she stood before her collapsed father. His grandfather came home later and took him to the hospital, but her father never woke up. She just heard from the adults that her father collapsed due to cardiac arrest. They wondered what his family was even doing. They claimed the doctor might have been saved by someone who can do CPR, but apparently they heard on his elementary school-aged daughter was at home. They whispered how the doctor would have been saved if an adult had lived with him. After hearing those whispers, Kiara had thought it was her fault. It was her who had left her father to die. Cecil then exclaimed it wasn't Kiara's fault at all. He pointed out she was just a child and doesn't need to be responsible at all. Kiara knew that, but whenever she stand before a patient, the memory of that day would always come rushing back. She worries that someone else would suffer because of her again, or even they lose their life. When she thinks about it, she just can't stand still. At that moment, Cecil hugged Kiara tight in his arms. This surprised Kiara. He then whispered to her ears that no matter what happens, he promised to be on her side. He asked her not to try to fight alone. He can't shake the feeling that she would end up throwing her own life for a patient one day. Kiara then talked, and this snapped Cecil's thoughts. He apologized as he released Kiara from his hug. He claimed he was just worried for her and got carried away. He then reminded her to at least think of her own safety from now on. He hurriedly excused himself. After the prince left, the hug that just happened made Kiara blush. She asked herself what just happened just now. Kiara kept remembering the words Cecil had whispered to her about his promise to always stay by her side. She wondered what that could mean. The only thing she could think of was that the prince might have feelings for her, but that seemed impossible since he had never shown any sign of affection toward her before. In the manga's original story, Kiara and Cecil were love interests, but imagining it happening for real made her panic. She almost got lost in her thoughts before deciding to forget what happened. If she started acting nervous around him, it would only make things awkward. For now, she reminded herself to act normal. The next morning, Cecil also felt uneasy about what happened. He couldn't believe he had hugged Kiara like that. After doing such a thing, he assumed she would no longer act normal around him. He told himself to be careful, or things could become uncomfortable in the clinic. When Cecil entered the clinic, Kiara greeted him as if nothing had happened. He was surprised. He asked if anything had changed since then, but Kiara calmly said she was fine and asked why he came. Cecil said he just wanted to check on them. He was stunned by how naturally Kiara acted. Seeing her put things into her handbag, he asked if she was going somewhere. She explained that she needed to pick up some surgical tools that had been sent for repair. When he asked if she was going alone and where the men were, she said everyone else was out. She added that her bag wasn't heavy, so she could manage by herself. Suddenly, Cecil grabbed her arm and warned her that it was dangerous for a woman to walk alone. He offered to go with her. Kiara was surprised, but Cecil quickly stepped back and apologized. Since he offered, Kiara agreed to go together and asked him to wait while she got ready. When Cecil was left alone, he still couldn't believe how normal Kiara was acting. He thought she might not be thinking about him at all. However, Kiara was very aware of him. She felt uneasy but kept reminding herself to stay calm. They soon headed to town together. Kiara felt bad for letting the prince carry her bag, but Cecil told her not to worry since it wasn't heavy. As they walked, he noticed the street filled with workshops and mentioned that craftsmen might often get injured there. He hoped they would hurry to the clinic whenever that happened. Kiara felt torn after hearing that comment. She said that ever since Jinhua arrived, only 3 patients had come to the clinic. Cecil was surprised to hear such a small number. Kiara explained that most people were hesitant to visit because the staff were young like her. Patients usually preferred experienced medical workers instead. Cecil said they should think of a way to fix that problem, and Kiara agreed while lowering her head sadly. Cecil blushed a little when he saw her sad expression. Not long after, a fight broke out between drunk men near a tavern. The people nearby talked about it as if it happened often. Kiara looked worried. Cecil knew he should probably tell her not to go, but he also knew she would still go even if he stopped her. So, he suggested they check the situation together. When they reached the scene, a drunk man was shoved to the ground. He quickly apologized and left with his friends. Some townsfolk muttered about how those drunkards always cause trouble even in broad daylight. It didn't surprise them since the area was said to belong to someone named Glenn. Curious, Kiara went to look for the injured drunk who had been left in an alley. There, she saw a wounded man being cornered by two others. The men mocked him, saying his friends had run off and he should just give up. Hearing his cries of pain, Kiara decided to step in. She told them to wait and pointed out how badly the man was hurt, asking them not to be so rough with him. The two men sneered and told her to leave if she didn't want to get hurt, saying they were in the middle of something important. Cecil then stepped forward and stood in front of Kiara, asking them not to touch her because they only wanted to help the injured man. The men glared and demanded to know who he was, telling him not to act so full of himself. Before one of the men could say more, someone kicked him in the face and sent him crashing into the corner. Everyone froze for a moment, shocked. A man with a noble look stepped forward, annoyed by the noise, and asked angrily what they thought they were doing to a civilian. The two men knelt before the man they called their boss and quickly apologized. They explained that the intruders were demanding to see the injured man. Watching how easily the man had overpowered those two rough men earlier, Kiara began to wonder who this young man really was. The man glared at his subordinates for a moment before suddenly smiling. He apologized for their rude behavior and asked if Kiara and Cecil were hurt. Kiara was surprised by his sudden change in attitude. Cecil calmly replied that they were fine, which seemed to please the young man. Cecil then said they lived nearby and came to check what happened after hearing about a fight. He asked if the young man's group was responsible for hurting the man lying in the corner. The young man told Cecil not to sound so threatening and explained that the injured man and his friends had been wrecking a friend's shop, so they only taught them a lesson. He assured them that they never went too far. Kiara found it hard to believe what she was hearing. The young man finally introduced himself as Glenn, the one who managed things in the area. He said he was glad to meet the nearby residents and reached out for a handshake, but Cecil only stared at him coldly. Glenn seemed amused by that. Suddenly, the injured man groaned and said his arm hurt. Glenn called over his men and they helped the injured man to his feet. Kiara asked what they planned to do with him. Glenn replied that they were taking him to a doctor since it would be troublesome to leave someone hurt all night in a corner. When Kiara asked if they were really bringing him to a doctor, Glenn told her she could come along if she was that concerned. Everyone soon arrived at the downtown clinic. Glenn called for a doctor named Aaron. Kiara looked around and was surprised by how clean the place was. A man then appeared, complaining that he had to see Glenn even on his day off. This man was Dr. Aaron. Glenn apologized and explained that the man they brought had been hurt during their earlier fight. He asked Aaron to give him a quick checkup. Aaron sighed and reminded Glenn not to bring injured people every time they got into trouble, but he still told them to take the patient to the treatment room. As Aaron prepared, he noticed a few unfamiliar faces and asked who they were. Glenn said they were only observers. The injured man started groaning again, clutching his arm while his shoulder looked stiff and painful. One of Glenn's men told him to stay quiet and be thankful they even brought him to a doctor. By the way he held his shoulder, Kiara could already guess what his injury was. Inside the treatment room, Aaron asked for 200 belks as payment up front. The man was shocked by the amount. Glenn told Aaron not to overcharge since that fee was worth several months of wages where they came from. The injured man insisted he didn't have that kind of money. Aaron calmly mentioned that this same man had come a year ago with an injured orphan. He asked what happened to the treatment fee from that time. The man looked embarrassed as he remembered. One of Glenn's subordinates asked why he had even bothered helping an orphan. The man said he just felt sorry for the child. Aaron reminded him that he never paid for that treatment, and the 200 belks now included that old debt. He told the man to find another doctor if he couldn't pay. Just then, Kiara stepped forward and asked if she could examine the patient. The man was startled when she suddenly touched his arm, but she calmly said she was also a doctor. Glenn looked surprised at the revelation. Kiara began her examination and noticed that the bony tip of the shoulder, called the acromion, was sticking out. She concluded that his shoulder joint was dislocated. She asked if he felt a popping sensation when he got hurt. The man thought for a moment and said he did. She then asked if he felt any numbness or trouble moving his hand, and he said no. Kiara told him she could put the joint back in place and asked Aaron if she could use the space for a while. Aaron agreed without question and went back to reading a book. The injured man lay down on the bed while Kiara gently took hold of his hurt arm. She pulled it with care, and after one steady tug, the man confirmed that his joint was back in place. Everyone around was stunned. Kiara calmly explained that she had only reset the joint, but if it had been left like that, it could easily become prone to dislocating again. She advised him to avoid moving his arm for a while to prevent straining the shoulder. After finishing, she turned to Aaron. She pointed out that he already knew it was a dislocation. She understood his position as a doctor, yet she still thought it was cruel to ignore someone who was clearly in pain. Aaron demanded to know who she was. Kiara introduced herself and said she managed a small clinic in the southern part of the royal capital. Aaron then realized she was the same girl who once got into a fight with a certain healer. He remembered hearing rumors about her challenging healers everywhere. He said he didn't care about her ideals and admitted he had no intention of treating people who couldn't pay. He told her not to drag him into what he called her little charity game. Kiara couldn't believe he referred to patients as customers. Disgusted, she decided to take over the injured man's care. Aaron snapped at them to get out and Kiara agreed, leading everyone to leave. Cecil apologized for the trouble before they left the place. Glenn's subordinate was confused about what had just happened, while Glenn himself was surprised that such a young and pleasant-looking woman was actually a doctor. He also noticed how observant and skilled she was. Aaron, still annoyed, muttered that any amateur could fix a dislocated shoulder, but deep down he was surprised that Kiara paid attention to the arm's movement and blood flow. He admitted to himself that she clearly knew what she was doing. Glenn, now curious, found himself more interested in Kiara, and even more intrigued by the man who was with her. Later at Kiara's clinic, she kept thinking about what Dr. Aaron had said. He made it clear that he had no plans to treat patients who had no money and refused to join what he called Kiara's charity game. In a way, he was right. Without money, even basic tools like needles and thread could not be bought. Maybe that was why he looked down on the way she ran her clinic. Eric noticed how quiet Kiara had become and asked what was wrong. Frances explained that a few days earlier she had argued with a doctor from another town and lost. Since then, she often seemed deep in thought. The two boys looked at each other for a moment, then decided to make her some tea to cheer her up. Kiara believed that if doctors worked only for money, poor people would be abandoned. That was exactly why she thought the country's medical system needed to change. Suddenly, a voice she didn't recognize asked if she was studying. When she looked up, she saw Glenn peeking through the window. Surprised, she asked why he was there. Glenn climbed inside and said he had something for her. He had seen her from afar and couldn't stop himself from calling out. He handed her a small bag of coins, saying it was payment for the treatment she gave a kind drunk man for free. Kiara asked why he was doing this. Glenn told her to accept it since running a clinic must cost a lot, but that was only part of the truth. He admitted that the real reason he came was to see her again. Kiara felt her heart skip a beat, unsure what to say. Glenn, on the other hand, only wanted to know more about her. At that moment, someone outside shouted and asked if their young master was inside. Glenn clicked his tongue in frustration. He couldn't believe his moment was interrupted and angrily asked who was looking for him. Blushing, Kiara wondered what had just happened and who this man really was. Soon, a few men came near the window and apologized. Glenn asked again what was going on. One of them reported that a fire had broken out in the tenements on Craftsman Street. Everyone rushed to the place where the fire was burning. A building was already in flames. Some people stood and watched, while others tried to help put the fire out. Dr. Aaron arrived, panting, and looked relieved to find Glenn there. He said there were many injured people and that Glenn needed to take charge of the situation. Glenn asked if everyone had managed to escape safely. Aaron explained that there were reports of a child still trapped inside. Just then, a man came out of the burning building carrying a child. It was the same child everyone thought was left behind. The child ran straight into his mother's arms. Some people wondered if anyone else was still inside. The crowd praised the brave man for his courage, calling him a hero for running into the flames to save the child. The man said he had heard crying and just couldn't ignore it. Kiara ran to him, worried about his condition. The man smiled when he saw her and thanked her for treating him the other day. But Kiara noticed that his back was burned and she needed to check him right away. She found burn injuries that needed care. Other people nearby were also injured and calling for help. Realizing there were too many wounded, Kiara thought hard about who to treat first. She then called out to Aaron, telling him to move the patients to a safe place right away. She said she would gather all the nearby doctors so they could treat everyone together. Soon after, in Aaron's clinic, Kiara helped the injured man lie on his side on the bed. She said she would handle his examination and told Eric and Frances to check on the others with minor injuries. Aaron watched the man's burned back in silence, filled with worry. The burns looked far too serious, even beyond what he could treat. He couldn't imagine how a young girl like Kiara planned to examine and treat such a wound. Putting on surgical gloves, Kiara said she would start checking the injured man. She asked him to open his mouth for a moment. Aaron was surprised by the request. The man followed her instructions, and Kiara noted that there was no soot around his mouth or inside it. She then said she needed to check his nose hair. Aaron, puzzled, asked why that was necessary. Kiara explained that when someone was close to a fire, they might breathe in hot smoke that could burn their airway. If that happened, the inner linings of the airway could swell and block the flow of air, sometimes making it impossible to breathe. That was why she checked for soot or burns around the mouth and nose. She added that burned nasal hair was a serious warning sign. Luckily, the patient showed no signs of airway burns. Aaron was stunned. He had never thought that someone could suffer burns inside their body from inhaling smoke. At that moment, he realized Kiara's medical knowledge was far beyond his own. Kiara saw that most of the man's burns were on his back, with a few on his arms and legs. She asked what had happened, and the man said he had shielded a child and taken the hit from a burning pillar on his back. When she asked about the pain, he said it stung a bit, but his back did not feel too bad, while the burns on his legs hurt more. Kiara understood and said she would take him to her clinic right away since his back needed quick treatment. Aaron was surprised by her decision. At that moment, Eric reported that the other patients only had minor injuries and no one seemed to have airway burns. Glenn confirmed that nearby doctors had gathered and were already treating the less serious cases. Kiara felt relieved and told the men to place the patient on a stretcher. Suddenly, someone anxiously asked where they were taking his brother. Francis introduced the boy as the patient's family, but Kiara could not see any resemblance between them. The boy shouted that he had heard Aaron was the most skilled doctor in the area. He promised to find the money and begged Aaron to treat his brother. Aaron calmly told him not to worry because they were only transferring the patient to Kiara's clinic. The boy stared in disbelief. He questioned if they were really leaving his brother in the care of a young girl. Others around them also began to feel uneasy and doubtful. Aaron tried to explain, but Kiara decided to speak for herself. She said that the patient's burns were in a very serious condition. She explained that the skin was made up of 3 layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous tissue underneath. For burns, also called thermal injuries, the severity was divided into first, second, and third degrees depending on how deep the damage went. Kiara then turned to another patient nearby and explained further. A first-degree burn meant only the epidermis was harmed, making the skin red and swollen. When the burn reached the dermis, it became a second-degree burn, which caused blisters and intense pain. However, the boy said his brother didn't seem to be in much pain. Kiara explained that this was exactly the problem. She said that in a third-degree burn, the damage went through all the layers of the skin, harming the nerves and dulling the pain. She added that the blood vessels were also burned away, cutting off blood flow. That was why the skin didn't turn very red, just like his brother's. Kiara explained that skin without blood flow would start to rot and cause an infection. They had to treat him right away and move him to her clinic. The boy finally understood what she meant. He then thought it would be better to have a healer treat his brother instead. Kiara was surprised by his idea. The boy insisted he would find a way to get the money. He said his brother was kind-hearted even though he often drank, and that he had raised him after their poor parents passed away. The boy said it was time to repay that kindness and asked them to take his brother to a healer. The mother of the child who had been saved by the patient offered to give some money to help. Other townspeople also chose not to ignore the situation, saying they wouldn't be able to face God if they did nothing. They decided to collect money together, hoping it would be enough to pay for one healer. Kiara tried to stop them and asked them to wait, but Dr. Aaron spoke up. He said it was pointless since healing arts couldn't fully cure burns like this. Everyone was shocked. He explained that healing magic could close wounds but couldn't grow back lost limbs or organs. In the same way, burns that destroyed large areas of skin couldn't be fixed with healing arts. Eric remembered that most people didn't know much about these limits and wondered how Aaron did. Glenn then revealed that Aaron had once been a healer himself. Aaron admitted that his magic had faded long ago, leaving only traces of his old life. Still, he said that even if they found a healer willing to try, the recovery would take a long time. He asked if everyone was really ready to pay for that. The patient's brother couldn't even respond. At that moment, Kiara said there was one method that might work for their situation. She explained that they could take skin from the patient's own body and transplant it onto the burned area. The patient's brother angrily questioned what she was suggesting. Kiara calmly said they would remove a thin layer of skin from the thighs or buttocks and place it over the burn. It would leave a scar, but it would let the skin heal even on deep wounds. Aaron said he already knew about skin transplants and their success, but he pointed out how weak and small the patient was. He argued that it would be difficult to take enough skin to cover such a large injury. Francis then calmly suggested using skin from other people. The others were shocked by his sudden idea. He reasoned that since many people were willing to help, taking a small piece of skin from each person could provide enough for the operation. Kiara quickly explained that it would not work because another person's skin would be rejected by the body even if both were human. Everyone looked relieved after hearing that. She could not tell them that in modern times, that method was sometimes used for treatment. Instead, she reassured them that there would be no problems. With some creativity, even a small amount of skin could be made to work. She promised to give her full effort to the procedure and asked the patient's family to trust her. The boy turned to his brother. The patient finally spoke, saying that Kiara had treated his arm before, even though she knew he had no money. He called her his savior and said he was now placing his life in her hands. Kiara smiled and assured him they would overcome this together. Glenn, who had been quietly watching, realized that Kiara was unlike any other doctor he had met. It seemed to him that a rare chance worth taking had finally appeared before him. Kiara immediately reported to Cecil after the treatment. She told him to prepare a large supply of saline solution, sterilized gauze, and ointment. She also wanted to order custom tools for the skin graft from a team of craftsmen, and she had already estimated the total cost for that week. Cecil reviewed the document while Royce looked over the prince's shoulder and was stunned by the high expenses. Still, Cecil agreed to proceed. In return, he asked Kiara to save the patient no matter what, trusting her completely. Royce reminded the prince that their clinic was already running at a steady loss and warned him not to be too generous. Cecil clenched his hands and said that what mattered most was showing results. He believed that sooner or later everyone in the country would recognize Kiara's remarkable medical skills. When that happened, support for the clinic would grow and their work could expand even more. For now, they simply had to accept a few losses. Royce had no idea the prince had been thinking that far ahead. He thought Cecil's decision came only from his fondness for Kiara. However, when the prince suddenly grew quiet and his face turned red, Royce finally understood the truth and he could hardly believe it. A week later, the skin transplant surgery took place in Kiara's clinic. She explained that they would first remove the dead tissue from the burned area. Aaron took part in the operation, silently observing how the patient showed no signs of pain even when Kiara used the blade. He was amazed that ether worked so well as anesthesia. Once the cleaning was done, Kiara said they would now collect skin from the patient's thigh for the graft. When Aaron asked about the tool she was holding, Kiara said it was a machine designed to shave off thin layers of skin. She had ordered it as a special request from a master craftsman. She then carefully shaved a small section of skin and the process went smoothly. Only the surface layer was removed and the wound on the thigh would heal in time. Aaron still doubted whether such a small piece of skin could really cover the large burned area on the patient's back. ChatGPT said, Kiara said she wasn't finished yet. She carefully made a cut into the piece of harvested skin while everyone silently watched her work. After some time, she finally showed what she had done. The small piece of skin had been turned into something that looked like a net. Aaron was amazed to see how much it could stretch. Kiara explained that making small cuts like these turned the skin into a mesh. Normally, a special machine was used for that, but she had managed to do it by hand. The grafted skin was now about 3 times larger than before. Next, she attached the mesh-like skin onto the burned area and stitched it firmly to make sure it would not peel off. Once it was secured on the patient's body, Kiara announced that the skin graft surgery was complete. Aaron couldn't help but worry if it would really work. Kiara told them that as long as the wound was kept clean and free from infection, the skin would hold. It would leave a visible scar, but the burned area would recover. She reminded everyone that the most important part of a skin graft was keeping the wound clean and warned them never to let their guard down, not even for a moment. After watching everything, Aaron realized that Kiara had achieved something beyond healing magic itself, all without using a single drop of mana. He knew this could change the future of medicine in the country, and maybe even the whole world, with Kiara playing a key role in it. 2 weeks later, the patient's back was healing well. He was happy to hear the good news and wondered how he could ever thank her. Kiara said it was his own courage that made the recovery possible. She also gave credit to Eric's healing magic, which had worked surprisingly well. Eric admitted that it shouldn't have been possible since his magic was only strong enough to stop bleeding. After the skin graft was done, Kiara had asked Eric to use his healing magic and the results were clear. The patient's skin improved faster than anyone expected. It seemed that healing magic could be used in many types of treatments. At this rate, Kiara believed the patient would be able to return to work earlier than planned, needing only a bit more rest. Afterward, Kiara thought about how successful the treatment had been. Still, she realized they had used a large amount of medical tools and medicine. The clinic couldn't depend on the prince's support forever, so she needed to find a way to lessen their expenses and manage their resources better. Suddenly, Reese called out to Kiara, saying that she had a visitor. Kiara wondered who it could be since she didn't have any appointments. Reese said it was a very important man. A moment later, Glenn appeared, saying it had been a while. He looked so neat and noble that Kiara was caught off guard. Glenn noticed her expression and asked why she looked surprised. Kiara pointed at his clothes, and Glenn quickly apologized, saying he came straight from the House of Lords and didn't have time to change. Kiara was stunned and asked if he really said the House of Lords. Glenn then said he hadn't introduced himself properly yet. He introduced himself as Glenhart Vulcan, the current head of the Marquess family of Vulcan and the president of the Vulcan firm. He said it was an honor to meet her. Kiara was shocked by this and asked why someone of his status was walking around the slums with a group of rough-looking men. Glenn explained that his men only looked rough but were actually members of his business firm. He added that he himself grew up in the slums. Since the city guards didn't patrol the area, he was the one who handled any trouble that happened there. Eric then whispered to Kiara about a rumor he had heard about a year ago. The former Marquess Vulcan had passed away, and his title and fortune were inherited by his illegitimate son who used to be a commoner. That son supposedly climbed up from the criminal underworld using ruthless business tactics. People called him a true villain, born and raised. Kiara had no idea what Eric was talking about at first, but then she remembered something from the original story of Cinderella's engagement. There was a chapter where Kiara, while preparing for her engagement to Cecil, was attacked by an assassin. She was saved just in time, but the assassin refused to talk and bit down on a poison capsule before dying. With his last words, he said his employer was a terrifying man and warned them to be ready. When Cecil asked for the name of the employer, the assassin only managed to say Vol before dying. At that time, Kiara didn't realize who the real culprit was, and the chapter ended there. Her past self, who had read the comic, had even complained about how they could not figure out the name from just Vol. She eventually stopped reading the manga before the mastermind was revealed. Now Kiara finally realized that the name Vol could have meant Marquess Vulcan. Glenn called out to her, which startled Kiara. He told her that he had heard about the transplant surgery she performed recently. He also said that Aaron had mentioned how impressive her surgical skills were. Glenn couldn't believe she had treated a burn that even skilled healers couldn't cure, and he thought she must be a special kind of doctor. Kiara shyly thanked him for his kind words. Glenn said the people in the slums would feel safer knowing someone like her was there to help. Then he handed her something. Kiara took the paper, and when Eric read it, he was stunned. It was a national banknote worth 10,000 belk. Kiara asked why he was giving it to her, and Glenn explained that they could start with that amount. He promised he would keep supporting her in the future. With a serious look, he held her hand and told her he wanted to be the one to support her and her clinic. Ever since that incident, the clinic's reputation had quickly spread. It was now visited not only by patients but also by doctors from across the royal capital. Frances stepped out of the examination room and reminded a female patient to return for a follow-up check in a week. She promised she would. Kiara noticed several other women nearby admiring Frances for his good looks. Across the room, Eric was busy explaining to visiting doctors about the special threads the clinic used for different wounds and conditions. The doctors also noticed several unique types of needles, and Eric confirmed that those were custom-made for their work. Kiara went back to her office. Recently, she had been preparing to create new antibiotics and anesthetics. With Aaron's help, her list of projects kept growing. It was hard to believe that just a month ago the clinic had been close to going bankrupt. Suddenly, Glenn appeared beside her and commented on her bored expression, startling her. He said it had been some time since they last met and mentioned that she looked even more beautiful than before. Kiara felt uneasy and asked what he meant. Glenhart Vulcan, the Marquess, was the man whose large investment had saved the clinic from closing. Still, he was someone she could never fully trust. In the original story, he might have even been an enemy of Prince Cecil. Glenn teased her for zoning out as if he were invisible. Kiara apologized, saying she had just been thinking about something. She told him it was nice to see him again and asked why he had come. Glenn explained that he wanted her to make a house call. There was a place called the Crimson Pavilion where many patients were waiting for her care, and he asked her to go with him. The two finally reached the Crimson Pavilion, which looked like a normal mansion in the outskirts. Glenn knocked on the door and a man with a harsh look opened it. Glenn said he had brought a doctor with him. The man replied that they had been expecting them and offered to guide the way. As they walked through the quiet hallway, Kiara grew uneasy. She wondered what kind of place this was. There was no sign outside, and the building stood in such an empty area. What troubled her most was why patients would be in a place like this. They soon arrived at their destination. Inside the room behind the door was a group of beautiful women. The sight surprised Kiara. The women happily surrounded Glenn, saying they had missed him. They had heard he was coming and had been waiting to spend time with him. Watching the scene, Kiara slowly realized that this was a brothel. When Glenn asked if it was her first time visiting one, she quickly admitted it was. The women gave her cold looks, and Kiara asked where the patient was. Just then, a woman with a calm and mature presence appeared. She warmly greeted Glenn, clearly pleased to see him. Kiara asked who she was, and Glenn introduced her as Madame Beatrice, the owner of the Crimson Pavilion. The madam welcomed Kiara to her grand hall and said she was glad to finally meet the doctor she had heard so much about. She explained that everything was ready and asked Kiara to follow her. Confused, Kiara turned to Glenn for answers. He explained that this place was the finest high-class brothel in the royal capital. Its clients included rich and powerful men, merchants, and even nobles. It was where the most important people in the kingdom gathered. Kiara then asked who the patients she was supposed to treat were. The madam stopped in front of a large door. Glenn confirmed that the patients inside were nobles. Because many people believed only the poor relied on doctors, nobles could not openly seek medical help. However, inside the thick soundproof walls of the Crimson Pavilion, they could receive treatment in secret. Glenn asked Kiara if she agreed with this setup. He explained that he had gathered the noble patients whom the court physicians could not cure in this very place. Kiara was shocked to hear that. She complained that he had acted on his own and suddenly told her about it without warning. Glenn apologized and quietly added that helping these nobles might become a way to support the prince, especially if she could earn their trust. Kiara was surprised that he already knew about her connection to the prince. Soon after, they entered the room where a masked man sat on the bed beside a young woman. Glenn decided to leave everything in Kiara's capable hands and told her to call his name if she needed help. She tried to stop him, but he had already gone. The woman beside the nobleman said that the doctor had finally arrived. The nobleman looked doubtful and asked if they were sure that a young girl was really a doctor and not just pretending to be one. From his tone alone, Kiara could tell he was a noble. It irritated her, but a patient was still a patient, so she had to treat him. She introduced herself and tried to ask about his condition. However, the nobleman suddenly asked in anger if she was Kiara, the daughter of the Bellworth family. Kiara confirmed she was. The nobleman shouted in disbelief, pushing them away. He complained that he had gone through all this trouble to come here after hearing about a skilled doctor, only to find out it was her. He worried about what the Queen's faction would say if they learned he had sought help from the Bellworth family's troublesome daughter. But before he could continue, he suddenly groaned in pain and fell to his knees. The woman beside him quickly caught his head and pressed his face against her chest, trying to comfort him. She pitied him, seeing how he had started hurting again. The nobleman cried out, saying the pain had gotten so bad recently that he could hardly sit or walk. Yet none of the court physicians he had seen were able to help. Kiara quietly watched as the two acted as if they were in their own world. The young woman explained that this was why she had called for the most renowned doctor in the capital. She pleaded with him to at least let Kiara examine him. The nobleman finally agreed and allowed her to do so, though he arrogantly warned that if she did anything foolish she would regret it. A short while later, Kiara confirmed that the nobleman had a thrombosed external hemorrhoid. Confused, the nobleman asked what it meant. Kiara explained that a hemorrhoid was a blood clot that formed in a vein near the anus, causing the surrounding area to swell like a lump. The symptoms would usually go away once the clot dissolved, so waiting was one possible option. However, the nobleman did not want to wait and ordered Kiara to remove it right away. Kiara calmly suggested making an incision if he was in a hurry. She explained that she would cut open the hemorrhoid and remove the clot inside. It would be painful, but it would also solve the problem faster. The nobleman stood speechless while the young girl with him tried to encourage him. Kiara then instructed him to lie on his side and pull his knees toward his chest. The man had no choice, and soon his scream echoed faintly through the soundproof mansion. Meanwhile, Cecil had just received a report about Glenhart Vulcan. Royce informed him that Glenn had once been the vice president of a large merchant company in the capital, and had become its president a year ago after the former president passed away. 6 months later, the previous Marquess also died, and despite being an illegitimate child, Glenn inherited the title. Cecil questioned how Glenn managed to gain both wealth and power in such a short time. Perhaps the dark rumors surrounding him were true. Rumors that he had poisoned the former Marquess or been involved in secret illegal trades. Cecil could not understand why someone like Glenn offered his support to Kiara. Although there was nothing suspicious in their signed investment contract, Cecil still felt he needed to keep Glenn as far from her as possible. He could not allow Kiara to be drawn into some foolish political conflict. Suddenly, Eric bumped into him. He said he had not realized the prince was at the clinic. Cecil explained that he came to see Kiara and asked if she was with a patient. Eric told him that Kiara had gone with Glenn to make a house call. Surprised, Cecil asked if it was truly Vulcan and why Kiara went with him. Eric could only share what he had heard. It was a place in the East District called the Crimson Pavilion. Cecil froze the moment he heard that and then ran off at once. Eric called after him asking where he was going, but Cecil shouted back that he would get Kiara himself. Kiara's examination went on for a while. One noble had a cyst on his cheek. Another had high blood pressure, so she simply advised him to eat less salt. One man was found to have a kidney stone, so she prescribed a diuretic and told him to drink plenty of water and urinate often. Before long, the last group of noblemen finally left. Kiara sighed and complained about how tired she was. Glenn admitted he never expected dealing with such stubborn patients to be that hard. Kiara shot him a sharp look and told him not to act like it wasn't his fault. She scolded him for not talking to her first before arranging the examinations for nobles. Glenn replied that if he had asked her, she might have refused. Kiara asked if he was certain about that, but Glenn quickly changed the subject and offered to get some food, guessing that she must be hungry. Kiara noticed that Glenn seemed unusually comfortable in that place. The way he chatted so easily with the courtesans made her wonder if he had been there many times before. Just then, the door opened and 3 women came in to confront her. Kiara asked what was wrong. The women started whispering to each other, asking if Kiara was Glenn's new favorite. They stared at her messy hair and plain clothes in disbelief. They couldn't believe she walked around without makeup, showing her bare face. Kiara had no idea what was going on. The women whispered again, then suddenly grabbed her. She asked what they were trying to do. One of them reminded her that this was the Crimson Pavilion, a place for beauty and pleasure. They said someone like her didn't belong there, and told her to be prepared. Kiara tried to resist and screamed as loudly as she could for help. A while later, Cecil and Royce rushed into the mansion. Cecil called out Kiara's name as they entered. Several women noticed them right away. A blonde-haired woman began flirting with Royce and showed clear interest in him. A black-haired woman asked Cecil why he seemed to be in such a hurry. Cecil explained that he had heard a woman named Kiara was inside the mansion and asked if she was safe. The woman paused and did not answer at once. Soon after, Kiara asked if the voice she heard belonged to Cecil. She appeared to be standing behind a partition. The blonde-haired woman tried to stop Cecil, but the prince had already moved forward to check on her. He looked worried as he made sure she was fine. Kiara sat in front of a dresser and slowly turned around. Her face looked brighter than before because of the makeup and dress she wore. The sight shocked Cecil so much that he could not speak for a moment. He asked why she was dressed that way. A red-haired woman explained that they had simply changed her clothes. The blonde-haired woman then asked what Cecil thought, since Kiara now looked like a completely different person. Cecil failed to find the right words. He froze, stuttered, and turned red. His reaction made Kiara blush as well, and she felt embarrassed. She found it hard to stay calm and soon declared that she would change back into her own clothes. The other women felt disappointed because they had spent a lot of effort making her look nice. Kiara explained that she could not treat patients while dressed like that. Just then Glenn rushed into the room carrying cake and tea for Kiara. He stopped at once when he saw Cecil standing in the center of the room staring at him with clear anger. At that moment Glenn realized the situation had already turned serious. In the end, Cecil found out that Kiara had been treating nobles. Kiara explained that Glenn had suddenly brought her there without warning. Cecil turned his sharp gaze toward Glenn. Glenn then explained that Kiara's medical skills had become a popular topic among high society. Many nobles had shown private interest, so he simply provided a place where Kiara could meet those people. Cecil asked if that was why Glenn brought her to a brothel. Glenn insisted it was the only place where everything could be done quietly and without drawing attention. He also noticed that Kiara was doing much better than expected. He believed this might even help fix the prince's image, since rumors said the prince spent money carelessly. Cecil stated that he did not care about his reputation and ordered Glenn to stop interfering. Kiara felt the tension in the room grow heavier. She wondered if there was any way to shift the topic and calm things down. At that moment, someone knocked on the door and Madame Beatrice walked in. Glenn asked what the problem was. After watching the room for a short time, Beatrice said Kiara was truly impressive. She explained that the girls who watched Kiara work could not stop praising her. They said she was clearly different from other doctors. Kiara felt surprised by the praise and thanked her. Beatrice admitted she was also surprised, but because it was Kiara, there was a patient she wanted her to see. She then asked if Kiara was willing to come with her. Soon after, they went to a theater. Kiara felt confused by the sudden change in location. Beatrice calmly explained that she had an old acquaintance who worked there. As they followed behind her, Cecil questioned whether there was really a need to wear such a strange disguise. Glenn, who was also in disguise, insisted that it was necessary. He explained that he was well known in the area, and even the prince would not want people to think he went out only to enjoy himself. The group finally stopped in front of a door. Beatrice knocked and informed the person inside that it was her. Kiara grew nervous as she waited. When they entered the room, a woman sitting in front of a dresser slowly turned her gaze toward them. Her name was Felicia. Beatrice mentioned that it had been a long time, and Felicia seemed pleased to see that she was doing well. Glenn felt surprised when he realized that the madam personally knew the woman known as the songstress. Kiara did not understand what he meant. Glenn explained that the songstress was famous for her singing, which many people praised as a melody that sounded almost heavenly. Felicia then became wary of the people who came with Beatrice. She quickly noticed that the woman among them did not look like someone who worked in a brothel. Beatrice introduced Kiara as a doctor and described the men as her companions. Felicia reacted with shock and anger. She demanded to know why Beatrice had brought a doctor when she had clearly stated before that she did not want to see one. Kiara felt stunned by the reaction. It was hard to believe that someone known as the songstress now spoke with such a rough and hoarse voice. Beatrice then formally introduced Felicia to the others as the star singer of the theater and her childhood friend. However, everyone could see that Felicia had injured her throat and was resting because of it. Felicia insisted that she did not need a doctor and kept drinking wine instead. Beatrice asked how long she planned to stay stubborn and said that her return to the stage would only be delayed if she kept acting this way. Felicia showed no interest in listening and wanted to be left alone. Beatrice tried to remind her about her sponsor, but at that moment the door opened wide. Felicia immediately stood up to greet a man who had entered. Beatrice explained to the others that he was Viscount Killian, Felicia's sponsor. Killian then looked toward the dresser and noticed a bottle of wine. He claimed that the wine was the reason Felicia had ruined her voice. He reminded her that she had once been unknown and struggling, and that he had supported her, yet she ended up with this result. Felicia tried to explain herself, but Killian ignored her completely. He said that he had not come for her. A young woman then appeared behind him. Felicia asked why this girl named Louise was with the Viscount. Louise did not answer and excused herself as she stepped inside. She went through the wardrobe and found a dress known as the water lily gown. Felicia told her not to touch it because it belonged to her. However, Killian pushed Felicia aside. This action shocked Kiara and Cecil. Beatrice rushed to Felicia's side and checked on her condition. Louise commented on how frightening the Viscount was. Killian then pointed out that Felicia was making a rough and unpleasant sound when she breathed. He recalled that she had promised to fix her voice, so he had waited for 2 months, but his patience had already run out. He announced that Louise would now play the lead role in the next Water Lily performance. He ordered Felicia to give the costume to her. Felicia said that the Viscount had personally ordered the dress to be made for her. Killian reminded her that it was paid for with his money, so he could do whatever he wanted with it. He placed his hand on Louise's back and stated that he had no interest in keeping a singer whose throat was already ruined, then prepared to leave. Felicia broke down in tears and tried to stop them. Suddenly someone blocked the door. It was Cecil. He He admitted that he did not know every detail of the situation, but he pointed out how cruel the treatment toward Felice had been. He reminded the Viscount that he was her sponsor. Killian only smirked and said that when a cow could no longer give milk, it simply became meat on the table. To him, that was all there was to it. After the Viscount left, the room fell into silence. No one spoke or moved. Kiara then walked closer to Felice and asked if she could remove the scarf. Felice reacted strongly and refused at once. Kiara calmly assured her that everything would be fine and promised she would not tell anyone what she saw. Felice looked unsure for a moment, but she slowly reached up and removed the scarf from her neck without saying a word. Kiara froze when she saw it. Her guess had been correct. A clear lump had grown on the left side of Felice's neck, standing out in a way that could not be ignored. After she finally calmed down, Felice sat down and explained her condition. She said she first felt something was wrong about a year earlier. When she touched her neck, one side felt swollen while the other felt normal. She had a bad feeling at the time, but her busy schedule made her ignore it. As time passed, the lump slowly grew larger. Once it became noticeable, she began wearing scarves to hide it. As the lump continued to grow, her throat started to feel tight and uncomfortable. Breathing and singing became harder. Little by little, she lost all confidence in her voice. Around that time, the Viscount grew distant and cold toward her. Then, 2 months earlier, during a performance where she stood as the lead singer, her voice suddenly turned rough and weak. She stopped singing and stood frozen on the stage while the audience whispered among themselves. People wondered what had gone wrong and why her voice sounded so strange. In the crowd, the Viscount watched her with a cold and sharp stare. Felice already knew her throat was not in good condition, yet she forced herself onto the stage anyway. By doing so, she revealed her broken voice to everyone. That moment marked the end for her. The Viscount finally abandoned her, and her reputation was ruined beyond repair. Kiara asked if she had ever told the Viscount about her condition. Felice remembered him saying her voice was ruined because of drinking alcohol. She believed that if he had known about the lump on her neck, he would have thrown her aside much earlier. She understood that the Viscount only cared about her voice, which was why she could never speak the truth. Beatrice suggested that she should let a doctor treat it, saying there was still a chance she could sing again. Felice refused right away. She feared that if a doctor cut into her throat, she might lose her voice forever. As she spoke, pain slowly spread through her throat once more, reminding her of the risk she was too afraid to take. Kiara suddenly became serious and explained to Felice that her rough voice was not only caused by pressure on her throat. She said that inside the throat were 2 folds called vocal cords. She explained that they worked like a natural musical instrument in the body. This was the first time Felice had ever heard about them. Kiara continued by explaining that deep inside the neck were the recurrent laryngeal nerves. These nerves allowed the vocal cords to move properly. If these nerves were damaged or pressed, the vocal cords could not work as they should. This caused the voice to sound rough and also made swallowing difficult. Felice realized that this was exactly what was happening to her. Kiara confirmed it and explained further that removing the lump could allow Felice to sing again. However, Kiara also explained that surgery carried serious danger. This surprised Felice, who had not expected such a risk. Kiara explained that the swelling was located in an organ called the thyroid gland. This organ had a large amount of blood flow, and many important blood vessels and nerves ran close to it. One small mistake during surgery could cause heavy bleeding. Even Beatrice felt scared after hearing this explanation. Kiara also explained that the thyroid helped control the energy needed for the body to move and function. If the thyroid was damaged, the body would lose its ability to create enough energy. This would leave Felice weak and unable to function normally for the rest of her life. Kiara remembered that this condition was called hypothyroidism. Beatrice became deeply worried and wondered if there was truly nothing they could do. She felt pain knowing that her childhood friend was being mocked and pushed aside like something worthless. Felice felt shocked after hearing Beatrice express these thoughts so openly. After thinking for a while, Kiara stated that there might be a possible solution. She explained that it would require careful planning and serious preparation. Both Beatrice and Felice felt stunned by this sudden hope. Kiara then turned to Glenn and asked for his help in carrying out this plan.